So Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And say again, tell us, those who don't know you, kind of what your role is here at Surrey Memorial Hospital.
So my official title is the Site Medical Director for Surrey Memorial Hospital and the Jim Patson Outpatient Care and Surgery Center. The actual job is mostly around being a liaison between the team on the ground and the senior leadership team at the Health Authority, to be a barometer and a translator and a probably facilitator of conversation is the role that I've been most tasked with. There's lots of details in the job description that the job description is 7 pages long, and there's lots of deliverables in it, but the most important function that I serve is trying to be a go-between between the health authority, whose objectives are to deliver care at a system level, and the individual physician practitioners who are trying to deliver care at the individual patient level, and making those two things merge in a way that allows for efficient care to be delivered to every patient every time, rather than just each patient when it's needed. It's each patient when it's needed in conjunction with every patient every time it's needed.
So essentially you're a connector and a communicator. Sorry.
Yes, the majority of the job is about trying to... I've broken down medical leadership into 3 main things, and they're not the usual things that you hear in a job description. The first job that a medical leader has is as a storyteller. And so the point is of the storytelling role is to try to curate information that is non-quantitative, because anyone can get the quantitative information, but it's about being that storyteller that allows you to make sense of the data that you're receiving as an operational leader. The second role that a medical leader serves is a translator. So a medical leader has to be able to translate operational speak that the operational team is doing and using into medical language and back, so that the consequences of decisions that are being made through the stories that you tell are understood at the operational level, and the decisions that are being made at the operational level, what impact those will have at the clinical level when the operation plan is executed. And then the third role of a medical leader is something that I've heard described as choice architect. These are not things that other people have described. These are things that I've kind of come to understand through my journey in healthcare. But the choice architecture is really important. What that means is you want to encourage, some people would say manipulate, but it's a little softer than manipulation. It's about encouraging people to make the right choices at the right time, without restricting their choices to the point that they can't make the choices that may be necessary that at a time when it's less, we'll call it tasteful, to make that choice from an operational, from an administrative lens. So the example that is used for choice architecture is you've got a kid's cafeteria in a high school. Where do you put the ice cream versus the fruit? And you might want to put the fruit first in the dessert tray, and at eye level or at chest level, so that the kids can reach for it first. You put the ice cream just out of reach, not just out of reach, in reach, but a little less convenient, so that they make the choice that's good for them at a system level, right? And on a longitudinal level that may be more desirable in the moment. You make the choice that is less healthy, available, but you encourage the choice that is better for the person, for the team, for society. Make that choice easier. Sometimes in administration, we don't acknowledge the important role that we have in designing the choices that we think people need to make in a very effective way. And we're also hamstrung in that choice architecture when we look at targets that are too short-term. So we're focusing on our short-term metrics. We might sacrifice our long-term vision and our long-term objectives in order to achieve short-term targets by making bad choice architecture decisions. So I see one of our really important roles as medical leaders is to keep our eye on the longitudinal ball, so to speak, so that the fiscal constraints that the health authorities put under by the government, by society, are actually aligned with a long-term vision for what healthcare needs to be able to achieve to meet its mandate. So I see those as the big 3 roles: the storytelling role, the translator role, and the choice architecture role.
Such interesting topics. in science and in clinical science, we often really look for the quantitative.
Yes.
And the storytelling speaks so much of the qualitative way of measuring things. And it's so interesting that someone at a relatively critical leadership position values stories so much. Tell me about that.
So interesting that you bring that up. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is that the data is really useful, right? And big data is revolutionizing how we look at medicine. In fact, I'm starting to doubt my own ability to compete with a computer. In fact, I'm not doubting it. I know a computer is going to beat me every time when it comes to computational analysis. Computers are more sophisticated than human beings when it comes to repetitive, boring tasks that require high degrees of precision. That's just the way computers work. But what the big data sets tell us is not necessarily what we think it tells us. It gives us hypotheses. It doesn't tell us what it means. It tells us what it looks like quantitatively. The role, and there's this dichotomy between things like between quantitative analysis and this qualitative research that we're starting to embrace, like realistic evaluation, those kinds of domains where we tell stories and we look at narrative medicine or narrative research, translating the narrative and qualitative research into analyzable data so that you can make sense of the big data sets. What does an individual patient journey look like when we look at the aggregate journey? And when we see that patients are showing up in Emerge, for example, with a high frequency, and we see that as a bottleneck in our hospital, what does that actually mean? We have to ask the question, why are people showing up? We know they're showing up, but that doesn't tell us the why behind the metric that we're measuring. And if we don't know the why, we can't change the drivers of that. Why are people showing up in the emergency room? Maybe it's because they don't have a family doctor. Maybe it's because the family doctors don't have enough office space. Maybe COVID has totally changed the way they engage. Maybe they don't have a phone for virtual health, right? So they're showing up because they don't have an alternative. Unless we understand that story, then we can't make good decisions. You could make the facetious argument that the best way to reduce congestion in the emergency room is have a pandemic every year, because we saw record low numbers in Emerge, right? Make people really afraid to go to Emerge. Probably not the best approach on a longitudinal basis for a healthcare system to make people avoid hospitals. Although, who knows, right? We'll have to see how that plays out over the next few months and the next few years.
There's someone I admire. I've read a lot of his work, Dr. Don Berwick, who I'm sure you've heard of. He says that the quantitative metrics are a poor man's story.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that you
absolutely,
that.
Absolutely.
So.
Right? It's the story that you tell when you don't have enough information and you don't have the eyes on the ground, right? The flip side, though, is that the plural of anecdote isn't data, right? And so you have to be careful that you don't translate a story. One of a very effective means of getting action to happen is to have a really compelling narrative. But if that narrative doesn't reflect a system-level problem, then you make bad decisions as well. So you need the marriage of both. You need to know which stories are important, and you can decide which stories are quantitatively important or common in terms of trying to develop strategic, in trying to do strategic decision-making around what are we going to focus our attention on? Well, what are the stories that are really problematic and really common, right? Really, really bad stories or difficult stories that speak to a truth that is common with lots of people, probably a good story to pay attention to and a problem to dig into.
Something that I learned in the physician quality improvement program recently was something called the Pareto principle. Is that kind of what you were just speaking to?
Kind of. I mean, it's part of it. The 80-20 rule is what some people talk about. You look at the things that are the big drivers, right? I mean, if the 80-20 rule and the Pareto principle was it's fascinating because it exists in lots of different things. Pea plants, the number of pea pods that a pea plant produces, 20% of the pea pods produce 80% of the peas. In Italy, in the middle part of the century, apparently 20% of the landowners owned 80% of the land. So it may not be exactly 80-20, but it's the principle that a minority of the things create the majority of the problem. If you chip away at those things, or you understand the things that are the main drivers, then you'll understand a big part of the problem. If you want to get 100%, you got to deal with all the little things that are maybe less significant from a quantitative standpoint, and maybe very, very important. But if you look at the size of the problem, and you look at the overall magnitude of the problems you're trying to deal with, I don't want to tick the boxes that are big before you tick the boxes that are small, unless those are critical, cornerstone issues that you need to deal with that are small. Quantitative.
And that brings me, like, this past year and a half, I've seen you work with some of the data scientists in Fraser Health. Tell us about the opportunities you see there and what you're excited about.
So the fascinating thing about data science is that it's really harnessing the power of computer technology and sophisticated analysis to recognize patterns that our human brains aren't capable of noticing. And the example that's often used, and you'll have to fact check the actual numbers, but DHL apparently did an analysis, the courier company, did an analysis of its driver behaviors. And if the numbers are accurate that I have in my head, what they decided was that left turns were really inefficient.
Oh.
So they eliminated left turns from their drivers' route planning. And apparently they saved $50 million, delivering the same number of packages because they didn't wait at an intersection to turn left. They only made right-hand turns, right? Apparently 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 3 lefts do. Right? But the point is that kind of pattern, when you scale it, it's not obvious at the individual driver level, but when you scale it to an international delivery company, the benefit that you get from seeing that pattern allows you to make decisions that are subtle, that shift a major needle on that company's dashboard, the financial needle, without significantly affecting the worker that's doing the task, right? So if I never make a left-hand turn, I probably don't notice. But at a system level, you start to be able to understand where you might be able to shift small elements of behavior that aren't particularly inconvenient for an individual practitioner and make big impacts when you scale it up. That's what I think data science has a real possibility of doing. The other thing is that we have been groomed as physicians to be autonomous champions for patient care at the individual level. What we don't see is when I'm focused on creating what I would consider perfect care for this patient, the backlog of patients that are building up behind me, they're actually suffering as a result of the delays that are being instilled by me being a perfectionist. And I'm using this as a hypothetical situation. If I create perfect care for this patient, I'm sacrificing care that may need to be timely as an intensivist for the patients that are coming behind. So I have to do a good enough job, fast enough, that I can deal with the bulk of the work that needs to come to me. It's not about doing the perfect job, it's about doing the right job that is necessary for that patient while being aware of what's also in the backlog of things that you need to accomplish for the other people that you're also responsible for. If I had one patient, then I could focus all of my time on them. But I don't. If I have 2, I need to decide how I split my time. Data science allows you to start to see the patterns that you have as an individual practitioner and the impact that it has at scale, as well as the collective patterns that we have that we might need to shift in order to develop better care at scale as well. Right?
What you just said there is so alien to a lot of my colleagues, who haven't had the luxury, or not had the luxury, but haven't had the opportunity to look at things from the systems process level. Because many of us were geared towards perfection or perfectionistic attitudes as we developed our skills in clinical science. And to speak to that level where we actually might perform better if we dial down some of our perfectionistic attitudes in some of our clinical interactions, that's a tough thing to swallow.
Oh, it's very, very hard. And the reality is, the question that I've been asking myself over and over again is, when we're doing medicine, we practice to try to deliver right care first time.
Yeah.
But what we know about developing a product, if the product that we're trying to develop as a healthcare system is a patient experience that is founded on safety, quality, efficiency, effectiveness, and cost, right? The big domains of healthcare cost. But safety is the invisible foundation on which we build everything else. quality is both experiential and clinical quality. So you got to be excellent, but you've also got to be experienced as being excellent. If that's the product that we're trying to deliver, then the question becomes, how are you best going to deliver that product? Is it by putting all your energy into a single shot, or is it an iterative approach where you develop it over time? And so what I've come to realize in my critical care practice is that my own inadequacies for developing a perfect care plan first time out are completely, what's the term? My ability to develop a perfect care plan first time out is completely revolutionized by my willingness to come back multiple times to check on how things are developing. So I can shift an imperfect plan and make it good for the person in the moment. I can make it good enough iteratively. Rather, if you're going to make it good enough, you're going to lose. So you've got to be willing to re-engage with that product that you've created, that experiential clinical quality, multiple times. That means being more available, listening more, trying to get feedback on what you're doing, all of those elements that when you're designing a piece of software, for example, right? You want feedback from your customers. When I'm dealing with a patient, I'm repetitively checking to make sure, have I done what I think it's going to do? My ability to predict how my plan is going to land on a patient in an uncertain environment is fairly low. And that's probably the mechanism by which I developed this philosophy. I'm only going to be right 80% of the time, which means I'm going to be wrong when I'm 5. My best chance is to come back before that plan lands a bad outcome on the patient and shift it so that if I do iterative, if I'm trying to hit 99% or 99.9%, a high reliability organization, I'm better off putting all my investment in creating that 99.9% first time, or I do 90% 3 times and pick up the errors 3 times. So it's 10%, 10%, 10%. That gets me to 99.9 just as effectively with a repeat cycle, as opposed to try to develop a first pass cycle that's right every time with a very, very high degree of confidence. There are some situations where you gotta be right first time. Cardiac arrest team, time limited, you don't do right first time, person dies. You have to invest a lot of time, energy, and resource into making sure that your cardiac arrest team, high fidelity, high reliability team, they take 3 minutes to get to the bedside maximum and deliver high quality care. Making sure that patients get elective medications to the bedside, you don't need to be right first time. You need to be right when it lands at the patient's bedside. So you build in multiple safety checks, right? Where have you got your errors, right? And you just have repetitive checks. That's why we have double checks with high-risk medications like opiates at the bedside. Do nurses check when it's being delivered? But there's all those checks that are invisible in the background, where pharmacy checks twice, and you've got computerized order entries sometimes, and you've got all these other things that make sure that your checks are catching the errors we make. We don't need to be right 100% of the time at every check, because we know we have redundancies in the system, right? There's a little bit of it's a concept that I think is really important, because in our enthusiasm for efficiency, redundancy is a bad word, right? But if you're looking at building high reliability organizations, either you have a huge investment in making it first pass perfect, or you have redundancy to catch the errors. And you need to figure out where that balance point is, right? You want to make sure that bad things don't happen to patients. And the way I break it down is high consequence, fast, means lots of investment. Low consequence, time elective, you got time to have errors, right? You got the luxury of building a system that has redundancy within it. And then hopefully the things that are creating redundancy have other tasks that they can do to fill their time that allow them to just be parachuted in, say, yeah, safety check looks good, and then back to work, right? Whatever their other tasks are. So you can build redundancy without having it squandered and inefficient. It's just thinking carefully around what systems do you want to intentionally build redundancy around, what systems are mission critical, and then all of the other various things in between.
This way of thinking of systems, it's not always intuitive. As a site medical director, where do you actually have the opportunity to train in these types of thinking philosophies or understandings of systems and processes?
Well, there's lots of opportunities. I think for me, the Sauder School of Business was really important. The physician leadership program I got to take very early in my leadership journey. I think it was an excellent foundation, but a lot of it is self-directed, right? And a lot of it is just exploring things and asking curious questions. I think personally, one of the things that almost every physician that I've ever met brings to the equation is a sense of curiosity. Right? Sometimes we beat it out of people during residency or during medical school, or even in clinical practice, when where clinicians are forced to choose between having meaningful encounters with patients and efficiency things, so efficiency metrics. So I think that things like EMRs have a dark side to them, which is in our enthusiasm for efficiency, we start to commoditize medicine in a way that can damage our long-term vision for medicine. For me, the thing that I'm most interested in a healthcare professional is a sense of curiosity. If they are curious about why things are the way they are, then generally speaking, they will ask thoughtful questions that will allow them to understand and change the things that need to be changed. When we start to try to quell curiosity, I should step back. The things that encourage curiosity are actually a little bit of space for that curiosity to develop. If you think about your mind, one of the quotes that I love is from Dee Hock, who's the CEO of Visa. He said, think of your mind as a space clutter, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the actual words, but your mind is a room filled with arcane furniture. Creativity emerges in the space that you clear out. You don't need to do anything special. You just need to clear a small space, right? And creativity will emerge in that space, and something new will come out of it. So it's about creating a space, either physical, temporal, cognitive, spiritual, social, whatever space. Our human brains are wired to be creative. Well, all we need to do is create a pause or space to allow that creativity to emerge in a place where the risk of being creative isn't too high, right? Being creative and then feeling under threat for demonstrating creativity. Creativity is a very personal process, right? If you are worried that you're going to appear foolish in being creative, then you're not going to be creative. Your creativity, which is really free-form thinking, is going to be stifled because you're going to be worried about what am I going to appear to be doing, or how am I going to appear in social situations, or what does this mean for my job, right? But being creative means taking risks. And taking risks means you need to have not only space, but a safe space in which to have those free-form thinking creative moments. That's why I believe so firmly in the foundational need for teams to be trustworthy. Is trustworthiness, right? We talk about trust, but really what it is leadership being trustworthy enough to allow people to be willing to take risks in the creative domain, and those risks might be something that is really objectionable, but it needs to be made okay for people to take risks and then redirect if it's not the right kind of decision to be making or the right kind of creativity to be demonstrated, right? And I'm using that kind of facetiously, or not facetiously, but I'm using that indelicately. But if it's not timely and it's not right for the moment, it's not about squashing it, it's about just gentle redirection or finding the value in that creative moment that you might be able to tap into to allow someone to harness the inherent wisdom that they bring to the room. Right? Their perspective is something that only they have. And I see the ability of a leader to be successful as by being able to harness the wisdom that the people that they lead actually bring to the equation.
This is such rich stuff. I have to make sure my camera's recording.
Okay, sure.
I would hate to lose this. It is. It's excellently recording. So, you mentioned creating safe spaces, and you said that a leader, sometimes one of the best things a leader can do is assist those that they're leading to bring their talents and insights to the forefront.
Right.
Could you break that down for us? Like how does a leader do that?
So one of my favorite leaders, I've never met him, but I would love to meet him someday, is a guy named Benjamin Sauder. And so he's the conductor of an orchestra in the States. And he has a very famous statement that he makes. He said, the conductor is, he said, on the cover of my CDs, you'll see me with my baton pointing, and I'm on the cover of my CD, but the thing that he realized after 25 years of conducting is that a conductor makes no noise. It makes no sound. Right?
Yeah.
A conductor relies for his power, or a leader relies for his power on his ability to make other people powerful. Right? So a conductor relies on his ability to have his artists perform to be successful. Right? And I remember when I was first in my role, so 5 years ago, my dad said to me, wow, you're the medical director for at that time, the second biggest hospital in the province. That's a really important job. And I said, my job is actually no more important than any of the other people that I apparently, that ostensibly work under me. I just have the ability to influence other people's lives much more profoundly. So I have a much greater responsibility to make wise choices, because I can make many more people miserable than they can. Right? They can. On the flip side of that, though, is I rely on every single one of those people that work under me to be pulling in the same direction if I'm going to be successful. So I'm much more vulnerable in a lot of ways than the frontline healthcare worker is, even though I have power and authority and I can make their individual lives miserable. If I'm not behaving in a way that is congruent with what leadership is required at the moment, then I'm not going to succeed, because my leadership requires the buy-in of the people I lead for me to be successful, right? And that's why I believe the best way for a leader to kind of start to engage with their teams is to actually be vulnerable, right? To share stories about themselves, to make it to be personal, and to go first. So how does a leader create that environment? By going first, by being vulnerable first, by taking risks, right? By being open to redirection, by doing all of the things that I just mentioned, and being and exposing themselves to the threat of actually not being complete as a leader. Right? So the idea of the incomplete leader, I think, is really important. I try to fill all of my gaps in with people that are much smarter than me in the domains that I need them to be smarter in. Right? So people like Marietta, people like yourself, my local department head team, my medical leadership team is growing because there's so many areas where I am incomplete. Right? I am not very organized. So I have people around me that are very organized, and my job becomes to keep my head above the water level and look for where we're trying to head. Right? So we talk about, what's a leader supposed to do? A leader is supposed to be looking at where we're trying to head, right? And then giving direction to their teams in a way that allows us to hit that target. The challenge that I have as a leader is that process is slow, right? And our healthcare system wants to move at breakneck speed sometimes. So balancing the need to be intentional in the moment and create direction that is focused and targeted with the need to be receptive to the needs of the people in an environment where we're trying to hit a long-term target that we're not always aligned true north on is a balance that I'm learning to walk even after 5 years in this job. But to answer your first question, going first, being vulnerable, and two qualities. Medical leader needs to walk the walk, needs to talk the talk, right? And needs to be affected, in my opinion, by the decisions they make. You gotta have skin in the game. That's one of the big strengths of having a clinical leader, is that if I make a decision, example being, how long it takes a consultant to see a patient in the emergency department, right? In our medical staff rules, for example. If I say every consultant needs to see a patient within 10 minutes, full stop, then I'm going to be held accountable to that same level, right? So I'm going to make wiser decisions for the people that I lead because I'm affected by the decisions I make. I then need to balance that with the need to be creating institutional change and moving in that direction. So I have to also distance myself from the impact of the decision because I need to be able to make the right call. There's some things that are going to be very difficult to swallow, but I still need to embrace it even if it affects me. So I can't be resistant to the idea of making tough choices because they affect me, but at the same time, I'm thinking about the reasons why choices might be tough, rather than just assuming, oh, people will do this if I'm also affected by those decisions. So I get that personal impression on what my administrative decisions might land like at the front line.
Wow. You said you have to kind of separate yourself, make some space so that you can make those tough decisions. How?
How? Usually it comes back to values. right? And it comes back to that long-term vision. Like, what do we need to try? What problem are we trying to solve? And then it typically involves me having conversations with people both inside and outside of medicine. I can tell you my parents are a big resource for me, right? They're not in healthcare. And I talk to them about some of the things that are problematic. I recently talked to my mom and dad about what is the role of the elderly.
Wow.
Right? In society, where we have this challenge where we look at COVID, for example. We have this problem in North America where there's so many elderly people that are housed in long-term care. And the question, and we don't have enough long-term care resource for them. And the question that I asked my parents, it was an indelicate but a really important question, is what is their role? What is the role of the elderly in society? And I struggled with it for a long time because my mom said, I hope it's not just to die during COVID, right? If my role is just to die, then that's pretty harsh. Yeah. And what I came up with in conversations with lots of different people, including my mom and actually my administrative assistant, Isabella, the elderly have two roles, and I would branch that out to the elderly, the frail, and the vulnerable. Have two roles. One is active and one is passive. The active role is to be curators of stories. So we can read about the pandemic in 1918, so the Great Flu of 1918. The problem that I think we have is that we don't have anyone who's alive that has a memory of that pandemic. There are people that are still alive that lived through both pandemics, but they don't have a memory because they were probably young children, right? They were 5, 6 years old. So they didn't experience it as an adult to know what it meant. If the pandemic had happened in the 70s, I think we would have had a very different response to it. And I can tell you, the next pandemic that we have, we're going to have a different response because it's going to be in people's active memories that are still alive. Very, very different situation. So the role of the elderly that's active is to be a repository for knowledge, not just facts, but what it felt like, what the experience of being through a pandemic was. And if you look at the important elements of history, we don't study history. I'm stealing this shamelessly. We don't study history. It's from actually the gentleman that wrote *Sapiens*. Urich. I can't remember his last name. But
look it up.
Yeah. So the quote is, "We do not study history to be able to predict the future. We study history so that we understand that there are many more possibilities in front of us than we envision." Right?
We study history so that we know there's actually a lot more
possibilities that exist in front of us than we imagine. An example being the Fukushima reactor. Right? There are rocks in Japan that mark the high watermark for tsunamis in the past, and the Fukushima reactor was built below them. Right? But there wasn't anybody alive to remember that. Right? So when we have elderly people, when they're able to tell us the stories of what it felt like to live through an experience that is not the same, but similar to what we are experiencing now, we can see that there are more possibilities that exist for solutions that might be important. Right? And it allows us to have what some might even call a transgenerational thinking approach. Right? So we're not thinking about how do we get through the next month. We think about how we get through the next month in the context of what does it look like for the next year, for the next 10 years, for the next generation, for our children, for our children's children. The second role is a passive role, because at some point in our lives, we are all going to be frail, elderly, and we're vulnerable. And so the society that we create today and the way we treat our elderly today is going to be the society that we exist in when we're in that state. And so I believe how we treat our frail and our vulnerable is how we will find ourselves treated. And we need to think really carefully about what we want that society to look like when we hit that part of our lives.
That's been a huge signature of your leadership style, a very socially conscious and very empathic and compassionate leadership, I would say. And you mentioned your parents, and I've never met your parents, but when I think of them as being saintly and as someone who would give you the things that you talked about. They would give you that psychological safety to take risks. They would encourage you to be creative. and things like that. Is that true?
Absolutely. And my mom was, so it was interesting. There's a book by Simon Sinek, who lots of people read, called
Simon Sinek.
It's called Start with Why.
Start with the why.
Start with why, right? So it's a fascinating book that I would encourage anybody to read. But it talks about, when you talk about, there's the why, the how, and the what, right? So, or it's actually the why, the what, and the how. Mm-hmm. So why you do what you do is what people believe in. What you do is important. How you do it is also important. But most people will start with, hey, I'm a doctor, right? This is what I do. Why I do it taps into that human connection with people that allows you to understand the person behind the description, right? And so the starting with why is it's a corporate mandate, or it's an influence mandate, where if you start with the rationale for why it's important, then the what becomes actually obvious, and the how becomes intuitive. If you start with what, you have to figure out, how am I going to do this? But if you start with why, those other choices actually are narrowed, and you don't make those bad short-term choices as often, because you're starting from a place of values, right? I tell you this because there's a follow-up book to Start with Why called Find Your Why. And Find Your Why. And so for my dad's 80th birthday, I went through an exercise with my parents. I didn't tell them what it was, but I went through the early stages of the Find Your Why, right? Because we were talking as a family. My sister was there, and my mom and dad were there. And I started listening to stories from him for his birthday. And the way you do this, you basically listen to the stories. And then you start picking up themes from the stories. And then you start connecting the themes, and you come up with, and the two fundamental truths that I know about my mom and dad are that my mom, the term that I would use, the one word to describe her, it's 2 words, unconditional love. And my dad, loyalty.
Wow.
So that's their core thing, right? That is where I come from as a child. It's, to be perfectly honest, it's kind of hard to get constructive, critical feedback on important matters when your parents are unconditional love and loyalty, right? So I don't necessarily know how to navigate things, but I always felt validated. I always felt loved. I never questioned where I came from, and I always felt important. And so that gave me the courage to be able to be who I am, take risks, be vulnerable, knowing that, I'm okay.
What a freaking blessing to have unconditional love as something that you're wrapped up around as you're developing in this world. And I have no doubt that when you speak of the vulnerable, the frail, and that you're thinking about, they may not have the benefit of that connection to unconditional love at this time. And one thing that really drew me to quality improvement is that I've heard some people say this is the science of how to deliver love more effectively.
Oh, fascinating.
It's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
And so, I resonate a lot with, I had a very similar background in terms of that. Mother is definitely unconditional love, and father is definitely loyalty. And really, really drawn to your leadership style in those respects too.
Thank you.
Now, what are some of the biggest opportunities you see with Surrey Memorial Hospital? Some of the people watching will be part of our medical staff, and maybe not, maybe also non-physician staff, but maybe nurse practitioners, midwives, nurses, etc. And you're always inclusive when you speak about what we can do and what our possibilities are. What are some of the things that you're thinking about?
Well, thank you for asking the question. What I would start with is, just to come back and to frame the question a little bit, Atul Gawande, brilliant writer, New Yorker, contributor, and surgeon, writes that medicine is no longer this autonomous champion for patient care ideal, right? The euphemism that's often used is cowboys, and he has a quote that even cowboys aren't cowboys anymore, because if you look at how cowboys run ranches, they've all got walkie-talkies that are acting in a coordinated fashion. No one's riding off into the sunset anymore. They are acting as a coordinated team. And in healthcare, we need to bridge this idea of being autonomous champions for patient care with the need for pit crews, right? So acting in a coordinated fashion, because we know that in modern medicine, in first world medicine, although we have these phenomenal technologies that we're developing and an ability to see into the body in ways that we've never seen before, and minimally invasive surgery, robotics, artificial intelligence, all of these magical medical imaging tools, 40% of people with COPD or heart failure end up on a cocktail of medications that's not optimal for them when they leave hospital. And so our technological prowess is not matched with our system level ability to deliver care. So people aren't reaping the benefits of our massive improvement in knowledge, technology, and ability to deliver excellent care. It's not landing.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, how do we build teams? And the reason I pause for a moment is that as an intensivist, my ability to deliver care is absolutely dependent on the team and the tools. Right? As an intensivist, if I'm at a car accident, the side of a road, I'm going to put my thumb on things when it's bleeding, or maybe I'll take my belt off and do a turnkey, and I'll get on my phone and I'll call for help. Right? That's what I do. Right? And so the most important role I can serve in an emergency when I don't have my tools around me is to remain calm and project a sense of calm, even though internally I may not be feeling calm, project a sense of calm that allows people to function at the highest possible level. Because there are things that might need to happen. And so me escalating, if I'm leading something, is not useful. And that's actually something I reflected on in COVID, is how do I personally maintain a sense of calm when I didn't feel calm a lot of the time, that allowed the team not to escalate with my own personal escalation. So that meant making sure, as much as I could, I was looking after myself, and making sure that I was well, because my level of reactivity as I get fatigued, or as I get hungry, or as I have a full bladder, or as I'm not feeling psychologically safe myself, my level of reactivity rises. And when I become reactive, those around me that I'm leading become reactive, and we derail. And I wish I could say it didn't happen at all during the pandemic. It did. I escalated, people escalated, but I've learned that for me to be the most effective kind of leader, I have to really modulate my own personal, I have to be very aware of my personal interactions with others. There's a bit of performance art in it as well, right? How do I show up? Speaking to the Surrey, I think we have a phenomenal team. Right? We have, over the past 5 years, seen a real gelling of the medical staff. Is it perfect? No. Right? It's always going to be a work in progress. And as the environment shifts, the needs of the team shifts. But I've seen a gelling of teams, and I've got so many smart people working with me that we've really got the foundation right now for being able to springboard onto something bigger. And that bigger thing that I think is using and harnessing data science, to come back to the other question you had, data science to really look at what medicine might look like as the next iteration, so medicine 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0, whatever iteration of medicine we're on now. I think people are referring to as medicine 3.0, because medicine 1 was primary care, you had a close relationship with your family doctor. Medicine 2.0 was this idea of when people started developing autonomy, and you had this, the pejorative term was retail medicine. Like, what would you like as a surrogate for an in-depth conversation with the patient? The idea of autonomy trumping all other medical ethics. We shifted from paternalism to autonomy to allow people to have a voice. They used to have a voice with their family doctor, because the family doctor knew their story and would be able to speak with their voice. When we lost our relationship with our family doctors and people started not having as much trust in the system that was supporting them, then they needed autonomy to have their voice heard. But now, when we were in that stage, I feel like medicine actually abrogated a little bit of its responsibility for guiding. Right? So unfettered choice is not synonymous with autonomy, because people often don't know how to make the right choices. And it comes back to that choice architecture thing. As clinicians, we need to be facilitating the ability of patients to make good choices for themselves. And so medicine 3.0 is about the counselor, physician, and about system level integration of care, so that we deliver on an experience that is compassionate, thoughtful, effective, high quality, on all of those things, and at a lower cost. The patterns that exist within medicine may be able to start to identify using data science. And so how do we as physicians collectively behave in Surrey? Because local culture and local resources will drive behaviors. And looking at how our behaviors differ from other sites, and then using the big data sets and the stories understand the why behind the differences, so that we might be able to find a bridge between a site that's doing a really good job in something that we're seem to be struggling with, but being able to bridge those two things by using data science is highlighting those high-level ideas, that big-ticket items, and that Pareto principle. Where are those big-ticket items that allow us to focus our attention on the things that will make the biggest impact in a way that doesn't kill us as healthcare professionals to do it, right? So it allows us to put focus on the patterns that we might need to shift. And the interesting thing about data science is that we don't necessarily need to know the why before we start, right? You don't need to have a great deal of granularity. The machines can crunch all the numbers and then give you a story. And then you can fact check it. You can say, does this make sense? And the thing that I'm excited about is by using data science, not only can we start to predict the patterns, we can also start to anticipate the needs based on very early markers of a patient's journey. And when we can start to predict the needs, then we can start to build resources in advance of the physicians asking for it. So in my brain, in my dreams, what I would like to see is that Dr. Yang comes to the hospital and he sees a patient with chest pain. And before he's even ordered the ECG, I know he's going to need it and it's available for him.
Wow.
Right? And then he says, you know what, I think this patient might have a PE. That CT scan, I've already anticipated the fact that he may be asking for the CT scan on this patient, and I've created a need in a way that is nuanced enough that we're not just creating an ability to have everybody have anything they want anytime. It's a nuanced accessibility that is more fiscally responsible. And I see data science as being able to guide that predictive resource planning element, which I think is super exciting and may allow us to actually dial back some of the costs that we're incurring by having we need this 24/7. Well, how much do we need at certain times of the day based on confidence intervals, right? What can we predict? We then need to be able to build into it search capacity when our predictions are wrong, because you don't want to predict so closely. We know that prediction really, really hard. The farther you get. Google weather, awesome, right? I know when it's going to rain today, but if you look more than about 3 days, the ability of the system, of a complex system, to be predicted more than a few days in advance is low, right? So the best way, again, is to check again the next day and then plan iteratively. It's common in many, many things in my life and in the way I approach problems. Repetitive testing, repetitive checking in allows me to have higher fidelity results at the time when they're needed. And it comes to an idea of a flow state. So in medicine, we talk about access and flow a lot. Access and flow is about allowing patients to get what they need when they need it every time. That means having the right resource available when they need it, anticipating the needs of the patients as identified by the needs of the physicians, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to try to predict the patterns that we have locally, looking at what kind of patterns exist in other places, identifying the drivers of certain behaviors, and figuring out how to shift them so that we can deliver medicine on 10 cents on the dollar. That's what if I was going to look at order of magnitude reduction in cost of healthcare, that would be what I would look to do. Is that realistic? No, but I don't care. Not realistic. I'm going to aim for something that is not realistic, because the danger is always isn't setting the bar too high and failing to reach it. It's setting the bar too low and meeting it and then stopping. Right? So if our healthcare system is to be sustainable long term, we need to fundamentally redesign how we deliver it, because we got to look at delivering it at 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, current dollar.
Yeah. Not everybody knows that. Not everybody understands the importance of the financial aspects of health. And so much of the Canadian system was based on compassionate care first, relationships first. The money is, let's not talk about it, because that makes us feel uncomfortable. How do you get around that?
I don't think you can get around it. I think that when we're at the bedside, we need to be not thinking about cost. But we, as stewards of the healthcare system, we need to talk about what's important. And that's where the values have to come back into it. Like I'm reading a lot about spinal muscular atrophy, right? And this new genetic therapy that's available for children that are under 2 before they develop. $3 million is what it costs for a single person, right? How do we justify $3 million per person? It's not a question of justifying $3 million. It's where do our values lie, right? How much do we have? How do we share resources? How do we create effective stewardship of the system? how do we advocate for that individual patient who has a therapy that has a reasonable chance of having a good outcome in a system that is constrained? What do we say no to in saying yes to this? It's an unbelievably complex question, and I certainly don't have the answer to it. But the thing I am absolutely confident of is the way to find the answer is to ask the questions and to have the conversations, and not have it sidelined by special interests or minority opinions. It's really about having that fulsome conversation, which again comes back to being trustworthy as a leader, that you can embrace these difficult conversations, knowing where your limitations are. So having a conversation at a societal level, how much is a human life worth? I can't answer that, but governments answer it all the time.
Yeah.
They figure out how much it's going to cost to put a traffic light up over a stop sign. And you decide based on how many accidents there are at that intersection, and there's a way of quantifying the cost of a human life, not the value. Right? So what cost are we willing to bear, but not the value? And it's that disconnect. It's Benjamin Franklin's quote, economists are the people that know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Right? It's actually about how do we start to look at cost and value together.
Yeah.
And that's really tricky. But that involves a broader discussion. It involves engaging with society. Like this is a big question that I think fundamentally our healthcare system needs to answer, because we need to deliver value based on the finances that we have. I don't think it's the right thing to be asking clinicians at the bedside to be nickeling and diming things. I think we need to be mindful of costs. And if there are equivalent tests or equivalent options, one which costs less, then of course we should be choosing the cheaper of the two. Because if we can deliver the same result at a lower cost, we should do that. But we also need to keep our eye on the long-term goal, because what we know about publicly funded healthcare systems is that because it's such a huge component of our healthcare dollars, it's very difficult for it's a big ticket item.
I think it's
a big ticket item.
Almost 50% of a programmatic spending in British Columbia.
Yes, and so when people are riling against paying higher taxes, you've got infrastructure, social services, education, healthcare, right? I mean, what are you going to cut? Are you going to? And the problem that we have in healthcare is that we've essentially got a blank check because it's all about acute. So when I, as state medical director, spend money and go over budget in the hospital with my team, government has to pay that bill. I get a blank check, and I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm spending that money wisely, because it's coming out of my kids' education dollars, and it's coming out of the disadvantaged, the vulnerable, the frail's welfare, and all of those social services that we try to deliver on. So someone's not going to eat if I'm spending money trying to save a life unwisely, right? In a way that's not fiscally responsible. How do we reconcile those two things? We have a very, very powerful responsibility as healthcare to make sure we are doing the best we can with the dollars that we've got, because we can just spend if we're not careful, right? There's certainly consequences for spending, but there are consequences after it's spent. It's not about the long term, it's about dealing with the immediacy of the moment. And we always, in our society, very often in our society, sacrifice the long term goal. We discount the value of the long term objective in favor of the emergent need. So we discount the cost of eating a lot of donuts because of the immediacy of the desire to eat a donut for the long term health consequences. So we discount that. It's what we do as human beings. In healthcare, we discount the long-term value of maybe making sure that type 2 diabetics or type 1 diabetics have good access to lancets for their fingers and blood glucose strips in favor of making sure we've got lots of critical care. Right? I'm the most expensive kind of doctor for intensives. Right?
You're the first medical leader that I've actually heard say, if I spend more on saving someone's life, someone's not going to eat.
Potentially, yes. And it's not a clear line, but it absolutely, that's the mindset that I've got when I'm looking at how we spend your money. That's why quality is so easy, because it is not an unlimited pot of money. It is, we have this much to spend, and on the floor here, this piece of the pie, that half is what I'm spending. And if I bleed into it, then it's coming out of someone else, unless everyone is willing to pay a little bit more. And people aren't too happy about paying higher taxes, right? Governments get kicked out of office for raising taxes. So what I do impacts government's ability to actually achieve the mandate that we ultimately need our governments to achieve. So we have a huge responsibility to be fiscally responsible, but at the same time, deliver on that value, deliver on that long-term vision of thoughtful, compassionate, effective, cost-effective care.
You and Doug Warwick are the only, I mean, maybe Doug Eby out of Alaska, are the only 3 medical leaders that I've heard actually speak about it on that level. I'm assuming other people are very conscious of it as well. It just don't speak about it very openly. But how are you? I want to check the camera. Yeah, we're good.
Hopefully this is good.
It is freaking amazing.
Okay.
So one of the first times that I remember speaking to you on the phone was somebody had made a complaint about me in the hospital because I had been doing something a little bit aberrational from normal physician behavior in the efforts of serving a patient. And I remember you called me and you said, and one of the things you said to me, I'm curious about what happened. And I know that you said, I know that there is more than one truth into stories. Mm-hmm. You showed me right away that I was safe to say what I needed, my side of the story, and that you were able to entertain multiple parallel realities in your mind at that time. And I thought that was really cool.
Oh, thank you.
And what you've just spoken about and expressed and shared with all the listeners and myself is that you are entertaining multiple parallel streams of reality, and you're able to kind of hold all these things kind of at once and try to mish and mash all these different schools of thought and philosophies all together at once. Has complexity and embracing complexity always been a part of who you are? I mean,
probably. Yeah. And I think it comes from just my sense of curiosity. I think the things that when I went through that exercise with my parents, there were 2 words that came up: curious and trustworthy. Right? And I have no idea how I'm always perceived. I hope I'm perceived as trustworthy. That's what I strive to behave in a way that is worthy of other people's trust. Mm-hmm. But curiosity has always been something I'm just interested in everything. I think that one of the things that I've been described as having skill with is holding multiple truths. It has a downside, because there are times when holding multiple truths, sometimes it's hard to know what I think, right? Because I hear someone's story and I hear another person's story, and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense, and this makes sense too, and now I don't know how to decide, right? Because in a position of medical leadership, sometimes you have to make decisions, and what I've come to recognize is that there's an ability to hold 2 truths simultaneously. It's called dialectical behavioral therapy is the concept, and dialectical behavioral therapy is this ability to hold multiple truths, or making 2 truths being real but not necessarily true, right? Is the catchphrase that's used for it, and it's also around the idea of cognitive dissonance. So most people make decisions for a reason, right? And there are very few people who have malicious, malignant intent. So the starting place, when something goes wrong in the hospital for me, is the person probably didn't mean to do what happened, right? And the reason I would open with something like I'm curious is because there'd be a number of red flags. One, was there willful intent? If there was willful intent, I have a problem that I need to deal with right now. 2, is there any hint of substance use or mental health issue? Another red flag, that person needs help, right? I need to rescue that person from the environment and protect the patient that is potentially at risk. 3 is the knowledge or skill. Would another person in a similar position have acted similarly? And then the 4th question I ask myself is the substitution test, which is, could it have happened to me? And if the answer to that is yes, then it's probably a system level issue that's landed on a person, right? If I'm like, yeah, I can see that happening to me. If I say there's absolutely no way in God's green earth this would have ever happened to me, knowing that there are different skill sets and knowledge, like it's not about me being an intensivist and you being a family practitioner. It's like, as a human being in a role, could I have seen this happen to me? And unless I can say categorically no, there's a question mark beside what actually happened. Right? And it's the if I had a graphic, the graphic to show would be a cone. right? If I look at a cone from the side, it looks like a triangle. If I look at a cone from the bottom, it looks like a circle. Two truths that can be reconciled with a narrative that is a cone, right? When something bad happens in the hospital, my assumption is that a person is trying to do their best. And what I want to know is, how did it go wrong? Because if it could go wrong for you, it could probably go wrong for me or anybody else in the medical staff. And if it's being brought to my attention, to come back to your quality improvement passion, we don't pick bad things in hospitals because those are the things that we learn from. We can pick anything. We can pick good things that happen in hospitals. Let's pick all the good things and then figure out how to make them better. But the important part about analyzing bad outcomes is that we can potentially make a transformative narrative or a transcendental narrative about how this bad thing happened to this person, and here's what we've done as a result, right? So you can change the story around what this bad event was and bring it to a place where we can make meaning out of this bad event. So it allows for healing for the team, allows for healing for the people that have suffered the consequence. People want to hear, I'm sorry, and this is what I'm doing about it when something bad happens to them. So by exploring the circumstances around it and creating a solution that allows that to happen with less regularity, hopefully never again if it's really bad, but happen with less regularity, we can create a transcendent legacy that exists beyond the event, makes sense of it, and allows people to heal mentally and cognitively. And that requires an ability to not react, right? So if something bad happens, my first thought is, something else I have to deal with, right? But I'm feeling that because something I have to deal with as a medical leader, but the person that is tagged with it feels a lot worse than I do, right? So I immediately try to go to the place where's that person going to be coming from? And try to not anticipate, but look at the signals that, how would I want to be treated, right? It's kind of the golden rule. If I was in that position, knowing that I'm trying to do a good job and something bad happens, I would feel bad. And the last thing I would want is for someone to drop the hammer on me when I'm already feeling bad, right? If I own something, I'm more likely, if I'm responsible for something, I'm more likely to own it if I know that I'm going to be responsible for the part that is mine. But if I'm going to be held accountable for the system that has failed as well as my own failure in it, then it's just scapegoat, right? So I believe very firmly in being a respectful leader and being a trustworthy leader, and that means just being prepared and believing that the people who work under me are doing their best. And I think when I assume that, I'm a lot more successful than if I assume that I'm surrounded by idiots, because I'm not, right?
It's funny because so many of my colleagues who are also in leadership positions, I do hear them say things like, everybody's an idiot around me, or always thinking that, you said you give people the benefit of the doubt that they're doing their best. A lot of them, they're intentionally doing this to try to screw everything up. And so
I think the thing that I recall, I remember seeing a quote or a joke that I thought was funny. In my 20s and 30s, I figured that everyone is people were out to get me. In my 30s and 40s, I realized, people in my 20s and 30s, I realized that that everyone was looking at me. In my 30s and 40s, I stopped caring what people thought about me. In my 50s and 60s, I realized that no one was thinking about me in the first place, right? So it's really about the understanding that we ascribe intent really quickly, but when it's our action, we are very quick to assign context, right? So someone's being unpleasant, but I'm trying to do my job. Right? So the difference between those two experiences, I try to hold in my mind when I'm in a leadership position. That's how you show up, right? That's about the performance art. How am I going to show up that's going to allow the best part of you to emerge in a situation that's difficult? It's probably the acid test of a leader. Is how flappable are they? When something really bad happens, how able are they to hold that moment and curate safe passage for the people that need to come through it? And that means being not reactive, not prejudging, listening, hearing problems, and then looking at the possible domains of solutions that might exist rather than figuring this person needs to go, right? That's the solution. This person needs to go. Well, then you're losing someone who clearly has the skills to be in this institution in the first place. And if you're dealing with a very divisive culture, where if you screw up, you're gone, at some point, you're going to be on the outside of that inner circle.
Yep.
Right? And so you have two approaches. You have a divisive approach where there's winners and losers, or you have an inclusive approach where we really want to keep people, we want to treat people the way we want to be treated ourselves. And by supporting people through their strengths and bolstering where they're maybe not as strong, then you can create that inclusive culture. The difficulty with that is avoiding social loafing, right? So when you get a big enough group, people can coast. And so how do you create a sense of accountability to a collective when you have large numbers? You need really powerful stories and you need pure accountability. That's where things like social compacts come into it, which is, I know we're working on Surrey, but it's challenging because what we don't want to do is translate moral imperatives into either financial or legal deliverables.
You have to break that one down for me.
Sure.
What moral imperatives are you talking about?
Doing the right thing.
Oh, okay.
Right? You don't want to make it a contractual obligation or a financial target, doing the right thing. Because the moment you do either of those two things, then you take professionalism out of the equation and it becomes a contractual issue. So you can say, I don't need to do what's right because these things prevent me from doing what's right. When you need to do what's right, you need to do what's right. Doing what's right is the kind of acid test of that is doing what's right even when nobody's watching, or when it's really hard to do the right thing. That's what integrity is all about, right? Doing the right thing even when it's difficult, and doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. We want our teams to have integrity, and our individuals and our members to have integrity, to do the right thing regardless. When you start making it about contracts and about financial deliverables, then you remove that moral imperative to do the right thing, and it's a sucker's game, in my opinion. Because if I'm in breach of contract, that person no longer needs to do the right thing. I need them to do the right thing even if I'm totally offside. Right? And I need to be held accountable for not doing the right thing. Right? So it's not about choosing to do the right thing because everybody's doing the right thing. It's about choosing to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
So part of your choice architecture designed for our system is to allow that freedom, that person to use their autonomy to do the right thing and get the whatever rewards there are of doing the right thing, that satisfaction of doing a great job.
Internal motivation, the intrinsic satisfaction of doing the right thing. Motivation is a huge part of this. How do you motivate people? You motivate them with autonomy, purpose, and mastery, right? So you give them a task that they are equipped to handle. It's just a little bit of a stretch for them. And you give them the autonomy to do that task, to make choices. And then you acknowledge their skill, right? And you tell them why. So tell them why you're doing it. Give them a task that they're equipped to handle, and allow them to do their job. So I'm of the mindset, and it's not very popular, of contracts being really simple, right? Do your job, right? You're the expert. Do your job. Don't let me dictate. If you think you need to be, if we need deliverables, what should I measure? Tell me how to tell me how I know you're doing the job that you need to be able to do, so that I can help you do an even better job. Right? Don't put a contract deliverable down. Let's decide on it together. Right? We can put it in the contract, but if I put it in the contract, that contract is going to exist, and we might decide that this deliverable isn't any good 6 months from now, because it doesn't meet our needs now. So a contract is something that's static in time. It's dated, and it spans the entire spectrum, but there's a lot of discussion right now around how do we make sure that people are accountable, right? How are we set their deliverables so people are doing what they need to do? Well, you start with trust and trustworthiness. Then you enter into respectful ideological conflict, right? And once you have vulnerability, you can enter into that conflict in a fulsome way. When you reconcile your conflicts and you've seen each other's point of view with that holding of complexity, you can then commit as a group. When you commit to a group, you figure out what your commitments are and what it looks like to what you need to do so you can move to accountability. And it's peer accountability. Rather than me holding you accountable, it's each other holding themselves accountable for the job. And then when you have peer accountability, then you actually see results. And that's what we've seen over the past 5 years, is this move from trustworthiness to results through the respectful ideological conflict. It's not yelling at each other. It's not calling each other names. It's, I don't believe the same thing you believe. And then figuring out what that middle ground is so that you can have that respectful ideological conflict and then commit to something collectively. Every time I've entered into one of those situations, the decisions that we've made as a result of the conflict have been better than the decisions that I would have made on my own. Every single time, without exception. I am so impressed with how limited my own personal knowledge is, and how much better the decisions we make are when we have that inclusivity. And the one thing that I see that we're starting to embrace much more in healthcare right now that I think is so important is patient voice. If this is about a patient experience, we need patients telling us what's important to them, right? Maybe a stent in a particular artery isn't actually what's important. Maybe they want to know that they're getting their meds on discharge. They don't have to go to a pharmacy. I don't know, I'm making that up. But the point is, we don't often ask because we get paid regardless of what people think of us, right? We don't have a customer service focused healthcare system. And while I don't necessarily agree with customer service as the ultimate objective, because free choice isn't what we're looking at, it's wise choices. The ability to get feedback from patients around what matters to them, super important. I get a phone call from my car repair place when I take it in for service 48 hours after I take it in to see how their experience was. I know at one of the hospitals in Fraser, they're actually doing check-ins with patients after discharge, and patients love it. They love it. There are challenges with it. If a person doesn't speak English and you're getting a call from the hospital and I speak English, it makes them pretty anxious. So yeah, it's like the hospital's calling. I don't know what they're saying, but it must be important because nothing is ever good when the hospital calls you. But the reality is our ability to procure feedback from society on what matters. That's golden, right? And we can make really good changes that are so simple in our hospital based on feedback. A lot of the feedback we get in the hospital from patients when I've actually done that exercise, I call people myself just to ask. And that was a personal experience where the person didn't speak English. There was a lot of damage I had to undo because I just said, let's try it. And it was very anxiety provoking for the patient and the family member. But when I did call, it was in a period of congestion. The person said, I needed to go to the bathroom and I didn't have a call bell because I was in a hallway. So we realized that we need to have a mechanism for people who were in hallway beds to be able to call for help, because there might actually be a legitimate physical need that needs to be met, and the person wasn't capable of walking, right? And the greatest indignity I think we could expose someone to is soiling themselves in bed, right? When they're of sound mind and know exactly what's going on. That would be that experience, no matter how good the quality of our care is. If I personally was forced to soil myself in a bed in a hospital as a result of not being able to call for help, the rest of the experience would be miserable. It would color the entire journey. So being able to be receptive to those kinds of things, hearing that the hospital had changed as a result of my experience, would change that, right? Because my experience, I would be confident, wasn't a solitary experience. I know other people would have had that experience. So being able to create that transcendent legacy of, hey, my experience changed that hospital as a result, the bad stuff then doesn't become so bad. And that's where the narrative comes back to that narrative again. The individual stories help us understand the why of what we're doing and allow us to make simple changes that transform the experiential aspect of healthcare.
I think as health professionals, we often assume that we know exactly what's important for the patient, and we often haven't made room for the other stories.
Absolutely.
You spoke about helping physician leaders not be reactive in the moment, having time to see the menu of options ahead of them. Is that one of the reasons why you brought the mindfulness training sessions into our medical leadership meetings?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things. When we're doing our medical leadership sessions, the things that I want are wisdom, creative thought, and team building, right? I want it to be an environment where people feel safe. What we know about time pressure is that it reduces compassion. Not because it makes people less empathic, but it reduces people's sensitivity to external stimuli. So when you're task-oriented, you get attention blindness, right? And I can tell you when my kids talk to me and I'm on my phone, I'll start to speak and then I'll stop and I'll be like, Dad, hello.
Yeah.
You stop talking mid-sentence. I'm like, oh yeah, totally, right? So the attention blindness that we have to the things around us, there's a brilliant study out of the, I think it was Princeton Theological College, where the researchers had theology students enrolled in a clinical trial where the trial was, there was priming effect, which was either the parable of the Good Samaritan or a kind of non-priming, not compassionate talk. Like, what is a theologian or theological scientist good at doing vocational? So something that's kind of benign but not directive. Parable of the Good Samaritan. What am I good at as a theology graduate? And then ask them to prepare a lecture on that they were going to present at a different location in the building, and put them in various states of hurriedness. So the first group, so they had two groups, the priming group with Parable of the Good Samaritan and the non-priming group for compassionate thought. And the various states of hurriedness were, they're going to be waiting for you got an hour to prepare. They came back into the room, and if I understand the study correctly, they said, head on over to this other building, and they'll let you know when they're ready. Second group was, head on over to the building. They should be ready for you right, within a couple of minutes of you arriving. And the third group was, oh my God, you're already late. Right? So better get over there now. And then they surreptitiously positioned an actor at the bottom of a staircase in between the two buildings that you could not ignore. Right? So you had to walk past this person who looked like they were in distress. They were either unconscious or they were hurting or moaning, lying against the door. And some of the participants actively had to step over the person to get to this other thing. And so what they found, very interestingly, Parable of the Good Samaritan primed people to stop.
Wow. Right?
So the fact that you're thinking about being a good Samaritan actually impacts your ability to deliver compassion in a situation where you don't expect to need to be receptive to that awareness of the need to take accountability, take responsibility for this. Hurriedness eliminated the effective priming.
Wow.
So when you're task-oriented, you're not receptive to the things that are needed in the moment, right? And that's a real danger in healthcare. People are so task-oriented that they actually aren't aware that the need to attend to suffering is present.
Yes.
So we need to be able to create the space in our clinical teams, because we hear that healthcare workers can be rude sometimes, or they're not attending to needs. If someone needed to go to the bathroom, there is no healthcare professional that would say, you know what, you're just going to have to soil yourself, or you're going to have to wait. Because we all know what that feels like physically. But if you're busy doing another task, you're like, I'm sorry, I don't have time. So making sure that our teams have time to care is really important. Why am I mentioning this? The reason I'm bringing this up is that the mindfulness allows us to pause and to break that cycle of task orientation. And so some of the exercises that we've done in the medical leadership meeting are specifically designed to engage the right brain. Right? So I intentionally want to get people to be creative. And when you're task oriented, you actually get attention blinders on. And you start to, and people become more reactive because they become more automatic. By taking a pause, you allow people to get out of that linear thought and start thinking about what might be possible. And that's the creative space I need people in when we're dealing with big problems. I need them not to be reactive and think about the usual. I need them to think about possibility and to brainstorm. And in order to get into that mindset, you got to break the patterns within it with an exercise that a lot of people do eye rolling about, right? At least initially. Right? So people, when I said we're going to do mindful eating exercise early on, the comment is, we had a kale salad. And one of the department heads said, I said, what are you noticing when you're eating? And he said, kale is really crunchy. Right? And I don't really like kale very much. Right? But the point was to actually talk about something other than medicine, to allow people to be aware of that experience so they're not thinking linearly anymore. That when you get a stimulus, you're like, oh, it's interesting, I hadn't thought about that before, rather than here's my response, because we are very stimulus response in medicine. Here's chest pain, we need a troponin, we need ECG, we need chest x-ray, it's algorithmic. But really, in delivering compassionate care, you need to be able to be receptive to the need, the care need that's also present, as well as the clinical requirement. And after years of practice, that's what experienced clinicians start to develop, is that the clinical stuff becomes so automatic that you have space cognitively when you're not thinking about, what's the algorithm again, right? I have space to start attending to that other stuff that's really important. And the other piece of mindfulness is not allowing things to bleed from one event to the other. So we carry stuff with us a lot. And when I need someone to be in a team-building, collaborative environment, if they just come running from a code, they're not in a team-building, collaborative mindset. So I need them to be able to turn off or to short-circuit their ruminative circuits that are going on in their brains. And that might involve talking about it, or it might involve distraction, or it might involve other ways of attending to it. It's like, hey, you look like things are not okay right now. Do you need a break? Right? So embracing a safe space where if you're really not feeling up to it, it's okay for you not to be present emotionally, but knowing that whatever you bring to the room is okay in a sense that we can redirect it and we can use that energy in some way. It's tricky because we have stuff that we need to do. And if I'm accused of anything in my leadership style, it's not being decisive enough and not telling people what to do and to not creating enough action. I'm learning how to create action. It's part of my journey, my personal journey. But at the end of the day, my belief is that I'm not the one creating the action. My job is to inspire others to create the action that they feel is important in a cohesive way. So if I'm just creating action, then I'm linearly scaling my ability to action. But what we've seen in Surrey, I think, is this emergence of organic growth, of collaborative work. And so it becomes exponential rather than linear. And that's what we need, is exponential growth of creativity and of compassion and of empathic care. Absolutely. The last piece of the mindfulness is probably personal for me. So I bring it to the group because I value it. I find it allows me to be less reactive. It allows me to be a better leader. And at the end of the day, for me, this isn't about medicine. This is about me trying to be a better version of myself every day. So it's my own personal journey that I'm taking. And as I'm learning, I want to share the things that I think are really valuable for myself in service to something greater, which is improving our healthcare system. And by pushing my authority to pause to the teams, then I give those people the opportunity to maybe have an opportunity to better themselves in a way that's meaningful to them as well. So that's the other piece of it, is I want to share the things that have been very important for me personally in a way that allows other people to reap the benefits of the things that I've seen for myself as out of generosity. I want people to be able to, and if they don't like it, they don't have to take it. It's not something that matters to me, but it's on offer, and it's something that I think changes the way I feel about medicine with all of the task orientation that we have, creating a little bit of space for us to be present and reflect on the things that got us into medicine in the first place, that compassionate thought and that wanting to help people. I mean, how many medical students probably said, I really want to help people when I went to medical school? I know I said that, right? And the interviewer kind of rolled his eyes at me and was like, well, I do, right? I mean, what do you want me to say? Like, I don't want to help people. I want to make a whole lot of money, which we're not anymore, right? It's about being in service of something greater than ourselves. And I think that the ability to reflect on the things that got us into medicine in the first place were important.
That came across. That came across. You sharing something that works for you is a very authentic thing, and you did it as an invitation, not as this is what we're doing now.
We're doing mindfulness. Pay attention.
And you always buy us delicious, healthy food. So kind of you.
Except for tonight.
No worries. Fasting is
yes,
also
that's right. Intermittent fasting. That's what I'm offering on offer tonight.
There's a thought leader I admire. His name is Michael West, out of the King's Fund in the UK.
Okay.
So the King's Fund being one of the think tanks of the UK medical system, of the British medical system. So one of the longest standing longitudinal bodies around, whose main job is to think about health system design and health system performance. And he's also a mindfulness trainer, as a background. And one of the things that he speaks of is compassionate leadership as a thing. And he always says that it begins with self-compassion. And then he speaks of some of the mindfulness practices that can help to kind of like an exercise to train self-compassion or build self-compassion or build some of that space. And he says ultimately some of the fruits of those practices are to kind of transmit positive emotional contagion. Kind of what we've been speaking of today, of maintaining that countenance and that positive relationship and positive energy, even when things are stressful around you, and knowing that they will cascade throughout the medical body, and that trusting that you're creating what Michael calls virtuous cycles of compassion.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that you do that really well. And
Thank you.
It's cool. I actually haven't seen anybody do that. And what always comes to my mind, because I am in a mode in my career where I'm studying leadership, also through the Sauder School of Business and other things. But I think you might be one of the youngest site medical directors in our system. I don't know if you've actually even looked at it.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I've been doing it for, I think I'm the most senior in terms of number of years right now doing it, but I'm one of the younger, for sure. If I'm not the youngest, I'm one of the younger ones. I know Steve Reynolds is also my vintage, but no, it's
You beat him on the hair front.
That's right. Yes. I do beat him on the hair front, but he beats me on the good looks front.
You're very helpful.
The thing that I reflect on the compassionate leadership, self-compassion, I think is tricky, because Steve Jobs said people don't know what they want until I show it to them. Bit arrogant, right? Bit arrogant, but one of the things that I struggled with was, how do you actually learn self-compassion? And maybe I had an ace in the hole because I had unconditional love, right? And so maybe the fundamental role of a parent is that unconditional love, because that allows people to develop this sense of self-compassion. If you've never known compassion, how do you demonstrate it towards yourself or towards anyone else, right? And if you're, we tell our high school grads in their convocation speeches, make sure you're self-compassionate, make sure you do what drives you. Well, that's the question they're trying to answer. What drives me, right? So when we ask people to do things that they've never experienced before, they struggle. So we need to show people what compassion looks like if we expect them to actually demonstrate self-compassion or compassion towards others, and modeling the behaviors that we want to see. And then, so my sister is a psychiatrist, she's a child psychiatrist, and I actually struggled, even though I had a mother who unconditionally loved me. What does it mean to be self-compassionate? And I remember doing an exercise in a mindfulness session that she was facilitating, actually, in Rochester. It's called Mindful Practice, and it's in
Rochester, Michigan?
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New
York. And so we were talking about how do you actually do self-compassion. And one of the techniques that she told me, which really resonated with me, is you put your hand on your own heart and you imagine yourself as a small child, right? How would you treat a small child that had hurt themselves? And what emotion does that bring to mind when you're dealing with something that's difficult? So putting your hand on your own heart and thinking about how you would speak to or behave or simply console a young child that had tripped and hurt themselves, right? It was a very poignant demonstration of how to be self-compassionate, because I thought, it's actually really simple and really effective, and immediately I felt, even just now, a little bit of tear come to my eyes, right? Like I felt a little misty, because it's hard to be self-compassionate when we're so driven and so type A, right? We always put a lot of physicians put their needs second in service of something greater, but we don't pay attention to our own suffering and our own needs as much. If we want to show up in a way, like we learn to distance ourselves. It's part of our professional need, is to distance ourselves from our own feelings in order to be able to do the things that are really difficult. Not so much that we disengage from it, but we are able to do the things that are difficult to do in the moment, and then immediately come back to it when it's safe and appropriate to come back to it. we run the risk as healthcare workers of never actually engaging with those emotions. And what I can say without a doubt in my practice as an intensivist is my ability to be vulnerable and to be compassionate and share in end-of-life experiences, as an example, with my patients. A lot of doctors don't like being around death because it represents failure. Our job is to save lives. I actually see our job as to create safety in situations that are really difficult and procure safe passage for as many people as possible in situations that people find frightening, unfamiliar, terrifying. Death is one of those things.
Yeah.
I see death all the time as an intensivist. And so it's not as frightening anymore. It's still extremely emotional, but I sit with some of my patients. Whenever I get the opportunity, I sit with my patients when they die. And that really highlights and spotlights the things that are important. When someone's dying, everything else falls away. Right? It's about shepherding safe journey for that patient and their families through an experience that they probably only get to be part of maybe once, twice, 3 times in a lifetime. Get to do it a couple times a week. And I never tire of it. It's always precious, it's always different, but there are patterns that I see. And knowing those patterns allows me to anticipate needs and be a little bit more responsive and curate a safe journey and a story that transcends the moment. And I know I've done the right job. It's not about doing the right job all the time, it's about doing a bad job as few times as possible. But pre-COVID, during COVID anymore, there would be times when I would get a hug from a family member while a person was dying.
Wow.
And I knew I'd done my job because sometimes they would get a hug, or they'd start to celebrate some of the stories, and they'd start telling the happy things that had happened in someone's life. I know I've curated, not the instrument of it, but I've helped create a space for a safe journey in something that is really tough. When I've achieved that, it doesn't deplete me, it recharges me, it fills me with joy, it fills me with energy. I leave work feeling fulfilled. Because families weren't able to be present during COVID, my job was actually a lot harder, a lot more empty. I felt more fatigued, not because of the physical and emotional weight of PPE, but because of the inability to connect with families in the same way. I had to relearn my job because I was very inclusive of families before, and then they weren't there. So being able to curate safe journey for families through death and dying when they couldn't be present necessarily, super hard. And that's something that I took away from this, is that how can I continue to be present when I can't be present, or when the family can't be present? Very interesting experience, and really required a lot of reflection, a lot of space to think about what it meant to me, and I think the sense making is what happens when you create space. That's what we need our healthcare workers to be able to do, is make sense of the noise that they hear and tease the signal out from the noise. And you can't do that unless you can pause. So, roundabout way of answering your question about mindfulness, it's about demonstrating a behavior that has been helpful for me, sharing that with my leadership, and hopefully having it percolate down to the frontline staff in a way that is empowering for all of the team members.
It's fantastic, and it's not without risk to do things like that. It is a little bit avant-garde, a little bit, but I think it's absolutely what's needed, and it was just so impressive when I see leaders such as yourself taking those risks, bringing in what's actually needed, even though it seems tangential to some.
All the time I get it's like, why are you doing this? It's like, trust me or don't, right? Trust me or don't. But you're right. It is a risk because, but I think so. I came into Fraser Health as kind of an unknown. I started as local department head and then quickly transitioned into my role as site medical director because of circumstance. So it was only a short period. I'd only been in Fraser Health for 9 months. So I was an unknown quantity when I started, actually 6 months. I was an unknown quantity when I showed up, and so I just did my thing, which hadn't really evolved yet. I knew what I wanted to achieve, and I knew I believed in team. I didn't know how to get there, so I just tried stuff. And I think that if I had courage, it was in trying stuff and not being worried about looking foolish, right? I knew what I believed in. I believed in compassion, trustworthiness, walking the walk, talking the talk, trying to make good choices, being receptive to people's feedback. And those kind of principles guided me to things, and being curious, I try to pull in things that I'm learning. So I can tell you with a high degree of confidence, if you think that I'm very skilled in what I'm doing in medical leadership, I'm making it up most of the time as I'm going along. Right? I have some principles that I'm following, but most of the time it's just emerging from the room, almost spontaneously, because I'm trying to be aware, and we've already created the conditions for that creativity to emerge. So I never know what's going to emerge, but I am absolutely confident that our team can manage whatever shows up, right? And because of the relationships that we've built over the years, even when a new person comes in, I think it's quite contagious or infectious or whatever medical term you want to use for it. It's a sense of inclusivity. It's not polarized. It's a discussion. We break bread. We start talking about complex stuff. We start talking about stuff that's a little dicey. We sometimes get into arguments, but they're respectful most of the time, almost invariably. And that space is I hate to use the word sacred, but it's kind of a sacred space to enter into. It emerges from the group, and I'm absolutely confident that the people that I'm working with are able to hold that space in a respectful way, even if they flare up. That we can manage whatever comes out in that space. So I am benefiting greatly from the willingness of people to at least park their cynicism temporarily to eat, right? and then engage in conversation. And everyone's shifted so much. There is a risk in being vulnerable too, and there is a risk in being empathic. In that, if a health authority or an organization isn't respectful of its people, if you're a compassionate, thoughtful employee and self-sacrificing, that you become disposable. Right? So if a health authority doesn't have its employees' best interests at heart, then the decisions may actually just burn through their employees. And that's why we look at things like turnover as a really important metric in health authorities. If we're getting lots of turnover, the question that I ask is, it's probably not grass is greener on the other side. If it is, it's because our grass is brown, not because their grass is super, super, super green and ours is just kind of green, right? It's that the environment in which those employees are leading, people don't leave organizations, they leave leaders.
Wow.
Right? They leave their direct leader. And so we need to, as leaders, my job is to empower my local department heads to empower their frontline staff. Right? It's that, and that's how we become successful. We become scaled. And if you look at Pareto, the other principle is that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. That's also scalable. So when you go from 1 and I have 20 leaders, I need now to scale to those 20 leaders and each have 20 people under them. So you become exponential in terms of your reach when you have that leadership team functioning at a high level. And that's the kind of thing that we need to see if we really want to deliver on an order of magnitude change in cost in healthcare, is an entire organization pulling in the same direction, understanding what their purpose is, and making autonomous decisions that are aligned with the long-term vision that the health authority needs to execute. Okay? That's, I won't say it's a pipe dream, but it's a dream, and we are working towards that. That's where I think we need to go, and whatever I can do to help facilitate that, I want to try to accomplish.
I have some questions about that. I'm going to do the camera check.
Sure.
And we're still good. So you've spoken about how we have the opportunity of data science. We know we have a pressing need to create or to redesign a system to make our health system to make it more sustainable.
Yes.
Because the costs are not sustainable. We're burning through our funding. You've also, and prior to this, us talking here, we spoke briefly about moving towards a little bit more upstream care, kind of influencing the demand for acute care services, which are an order above in terms of its costs often. So, what do you think are some of the ways that we can use data science, leverage some of these leadership pearls of wisdom, sometimes that you can call them, to kind of influence some of our community and primary care partners using data science?
So I think to answer your question, we have to ask the right questions, right? And we have to be broad enough in scope and thoughtful enough to. Data science can only answer questions related to the data that is input. So if we get all of our information from Meditech, we will never be able to answer the questions of primary care. All we'll be able to answer is who's coming to emerge, but we won't understand the why. So somehow we're going to have to engage with those other organizations. But I wonder, with respect to your question, there's an opportunity, I think, with acute care. Acute care is kind of like the goalie of the healthcare system, right? When everything else breaks down, patients show up and emerge. And so I wonder, John Diggle, one of our neurologists, has talked to me a little bit about this. We kind of need to flip medicine on its head a little bit. An emergency department presentation may actually be a failure, right? It's a failure of something. And then I don't want to use the word failure, it's a signal.
It's a signal.
Right? There is something that has required this person to show up. Maybe it's a car accident, right? Maybe it's diabetic crisis, maybe it's spousal abuse. Whatever the reason that someone's showing up and emerge, there's a signal there that we need to pay attention to. Because I'm not saying that everything is preventable, but we need to pay attention to the reasons people are coming into the emergency department in the first place, and then create systematic solutions for the ones that are common and solvable, right, and predictable. In order to be able to look at those things, we need to cast a very wide net. And where I see data science coming in is we can start to tease apart. I can tell you the top 3 reasons people come to our emergency department. Chest pain, shortness of breath, and abdominal pain. And then there's a smattering of things, broken bones and confusional states and headaches and bleeding and traumas. But at Surrey, we see abdominal pain, shortness of breath, and chest pain. A lot. I don't know why. So we're starting to look at what are the things that drive abdominal pain presentations, right? With data science, we can start to link some of the fields outside of medicine. Like, I don't know what broken bones would drive broken bones, but I can tell you with a pretty high degree of confidence that when there's a snowstorm, our orthopedic surgeons are busy on weekends. So we might be able to look at Google weather data and say 10 centimeters of snow means that we're going to need an extra 2 ORs 36 hours from now. Because people are going, or we might need more cats because people are going to shovel snow, although they don't shovel snow very often in Vancouver, right? They may get chest pain. We know in Edmonton that was the case, that we saw lots of, after a fresh snowstorm, we would have lots more presentations to the emergency department for chest pain. But maybe 3 millimeters of rain is actually important because it just makes a little bit of an oil slick on the road. It lifts the oil on the road and we get more car accidents. With data science, we can start to look at some of the determinants of emergency department presentation as a way of starting to get to some of the drivers that exist outside of the organization. And we can start to look at, if we can collect data, when are GP's offices open, right? What do we do around holidays? How do we resource our system so that on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, predictable holidays, the Easter long weekend, when people do need breaks, I'm not saying that we need every family doctor working 24/7, 365 is not sustainable, but how at a system level do we start to coordinate resources so that if one physician is absent, we have someone to backfill? It's the idea about physicians and healthcare workers being replaceable without being disposable, right? And it's really important because if I was to drop dead, I need someone to fill in. My job, my position is far too important for it to be dependent on me. So we need to have people who could step into that role and fill the void that would be created by me suddenly dropping dead in a way that is sustainable. Not to trivialize the important contribution that any individual person makes, but not to make it dependent on that person carrying the ball 24/7, 365, because we know that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
So do we talk to the Division of Family Practice and try to coordinate holiday schedules? Because there's going to be business to see, right? Maybe we need to talk to the government to deal with those caps on the number of patients that you can see in a day on days when we need people to see more because we know other people are closing down, right? I'm just thinking off the top of my head right now. But those are the kinds of patterns we could uncover with data science, which are, I think, for a lot of clinicians, kind of self-evident big picture patterns, but we've never been able to quantify them.
Yeah.
So we could start to create a business case. This is what it costs, because this is how many patients we see present in the emergency department on a regular basis for the past 5 years during this time period. So you can make a case for, in the long run, for looking at the long lens, calling it overtime for this office on this weekend is going to save us emergency department presentations and link the two. Maybe not causative, but associative. And then we need to stop siloing budgets, right? So if I need to spend money on a drug to avoid a hospitalization, we need to be able to balance the books, not each book individually, because that creates big problems. I know you talk about silos a lot, right? We need to, we need to, absolutely. We need to understand the silos. The silos have a function, but we need to not be constrained by the silo, right? We need to be able to break the wall, the barriers that are impairing our ability to do the job that we actually need to do what's right in service. The silos have to serve what's right, not what exists. And so I think that that's what data science comes in. It may allow us to break some of those silos. And the moonshot is that healthcare starts to help communities design and influence the social determinants of health. So I'm looking at geoinformatics, like I'm interested in geoinformatics. Where are people presenting from? Hey, you're looking at putting a long-term care facility in this neighborhood. We know there's some crime there. The things that reduce crime are well-lit spaces, police, like community police presence, not armed officers, but maybe they need to have a police station nearby, well-lit green spaces, so that when the temperature is 30 degrees outside, the elderly people in that nursing home or in that care facility aren't trapped in the rooms and we're forcing ourselves to use air conditioning to keep them cool. They go outside and they can have a walk in a park with some water, right? So you start designing communities based on the social determinants of health that we can start to identify using data science. Where are people struggling? Let's start using the things that they're struggling with. Maybe we know that there's a neighborhood in Surrey where children are showing up in our pediatric emerge because they've got signs of malnutrition, right? If we could look at where they're coming from, where they're living, then we maybe in the schools in that neighborhood, we could do breakfast programs to ensure that they're getting at least a smattering of calories that are high quality when they go to school to reduce emissions to our emergency department. That's the kind of thing that I think data science allows us to do, to really think big picture, start harnessing the social determinants of health, use some of the resources that are available outside of healthcare. We know if healthcare designs something, it costs 10 times as much as if a community designs it. Maybe we don't need perfect, healthcare perfect. Maybe we need good enough. Maybe instead of doing inpatient hospital rehab, we have a partnership with a gym, and we put a physio in there, and we give people the ability to go to that gym for 10 sessions, right? Maybe we put up a YMCA or a YWCA in a community that has a paucity of rehab facilities so that people who are leaving hospital actually have the ability, and we give them a 10-week pass, right? Again, making stuff up. But not relying on healthcare to build the health infrastructure for wellness, but using the knowledge that we have about health to help communities build well communities. That's where I think transformation happens. We have, I would love to be working with the city planners and City Hall to help design healthy communities. Right now, we really don't have much to add, but with data science, we have the opportunity to start looking at some of these broad patterns that we see, where we might be able to have an injection of dollars or of human resource or of infrastructure that might allow us to change the narrative of those communities or those sub-communities and drive important measures that allow us to reduce the costs in the healthcare system. And when I say reduce costs, we'll always probably spend every penny we receive, but maybe we can help more people with those pennies that we receive, and with the billions of dollars that we receive. Let me be more accurate. The billions of dollars that we receive to deliver healthcare in Fraser, we can be more wise and more effective with that same number of dollars, because we'll spend whatever we're given. For sure, the need outstrips the available resource. But if we can come closer to meeting the need in a way that is more focused on wellness rather than on disease states, then we start talking about how do we build, sustainable healthcare. How do we allow people to make better choices for themselves? How do we design that choice architecture that allows communities to be healthy? They have ability to get food that is higher quality because they have stores that are providing high quality food. There's no food deserts. I actually would be interested in looking at something called a food desert. If you're too far away from resources and you don't have, there are places in the US where people have to ride a bus for 2.5 hours to get reasonable groceries. And so they're not going to do that when they're working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet. So they're going to be living off of packaged food rather than fresh produce. Right? That's just the nature of time constraint. And unless you can slow down the rotation of the earth and make days longer, you're not going to win on that front. So by looking at where these disadvantaged communities might exist, knowing that we have on the political spectrum, I know everything in North America is kind of right wing, but on the left side of the right wing, we have an opportunity to harness some of that community spirit that I think Canadians have. That has been brought forward during COVID, right? This sense of community goodwill. I don't want to squander. I want to harness it and actually put that energy into something that transforms society in any way that I'm able to do it. I think shifting the spotlight from the healthcare worker to the things that we recognize as pivotal needs for society is really important. Again, though, we can't do it based on story or on anecdote. We can do it based on story, but we have to be sure that the stories represent the broader picture. Otherwise, we're going to not be effective in creating these initiatives. They're going to be small, and they're going to help a few people, but we really want to help as many people as possible.
I resonate so much, and it's so heartening to hear, a acute care leader speak about the social determinants of health. It really speaks to your ability to embrace complexity and to see the myriad causality within what you're seeing in your ICU vent bed. That there is a causality that links to sometimes childhood, and the amount of unconditional love, the capacity that there was in the parenting, and the type of food that they were able to get in the cafeteria, the resources they had to learn how to keep fit and to stay well, and you're appreciating the wellness-illness continuum rather than a simply disease state and symptom reduction. It's so heartening to hear that from someone in your position. And I really hope that you do have that chance to integrate with city planners, etc., and share what we see in Surrey Memorial Hospital, move it really upstream to create these well communities. There are projects such as the self-healing communities that comes from some of the child and youth mental health work, where they're addressing trauma, trying to create more trauma-responsive leaders within the communities.
Like the trauma-informed care movement.
Yeah, exactly. And I think understanding that linkage between psychological trauma and eventual metabolic disease, and how the ACEs study by, I think his name was Filetti in California. Your sister would probably know a lot more about this than I do, but how some of the trauma that our patients here in Surrey experience impacts their health trajectory for so many years and accumulates, and then ends them up sometimes in the ICU.
Well, I wish I had. This is why I appreciate talking to people like you, because you have this vast set of knowledge that simply I may have heard smatterings of, but you are well versed in a lot of it. The thing that I see in the ICU is that I reflect on a lot of times is, I'll see someone who's got a substance use issue, and I think to myself, how did they get there, right? What was it that created these conditions for them, and the choices that they make? No one comes to emerge because they want to, right? They come to emerge because there's an unmet need, and I can't imagine, I've seen some patients who have just had devastating lives, and I can't imagine what it must be like to walk a mile in their shoes, right? So those are actually the patients that I like talking to most, because the ones that are the hardest to love are the ones that probably need it most.
Absolutely.
And the transformation that I see in patients who are profoundly disadvantaged, who I do something as simple as buy a cup of coffee for when they're in the ICU, once they've had their endotracheal tube taken out and they're like, oh my God, I feel horrible. I want to leave. It's like, you drink coffee? It's like, yes. Would you like me to buy you a cup of coffee? The number of people I have dissuaded from leaving against medical advice by buying them a cookie or a cup of coffee and saying, look, just trust me, I need another couple of days to work with you and your health problems so that you don't walk out of here, take your oxygen off and go outside and collapse, right? And hearing some of their stories behind it, even if they leave against medical advice after I've done that, which they've done, right? It hasn't been a successful intervention, but maybe I've shifted things just a little bit in their mind that the next time they have a need they're afraid or they're suffering or maybe they come to receive care just a little bit earlier, so that the consequences of whatever's wrong in the moment can be mitigated a little bit earlier, or maybe they recognize that not everybody is a jerk, right? As simple as that people are able to pay attention to some of their needs and treat them like a human being, that the entire world isn't out to get them, that there might be another person who is willing to listen to their story, right? Shift that conversation or that thought process just a hair so that they're not reactive in a way that is maladaptive, that maybe they pause just for a moment to say, hold on, I just had an experience where somebody actually listened to me for a moment. I hope that that's how it's received. Certainly, they have their own perceptual framework that may or may not permit them to accept that kind of reality or to even entertain that kind of reality. And maybe it's dangerous for them to entertain that kind of reality in some of the circumstances they find themselves. But I think at the end of the day, I see every interaction with another human being as an opportunity to create positive change in their lives, right? Even if it's small. And just to shift the conversation in a way that needs to be shifted so that we can have this inclusive. I'm not talking kumbaya, but sure, maybe kumbaya, right? You want people to feel safe in society. That's kind of what it's all about. That no matter what happens to you, you know you're going to be cared for. If your care is contingent on being valued, then at some point you're not going to be valued, right? And maybe your value is just that you're a human being. Creating that kind of society where we value people, it's our hospital credo, right? Delivering high quality care where every person matters. It's not just about patients, it's about providers, it's about the entire team, it's about the family members of the patients. That's what the medical staff came up with 5 years ago when I told them we're going to look at what it means to be a healthcare practitioner at Surrey Memorial Hospital again, just to revisit what we did 5 years ago. But that was what resonated most with the teams. And so allowing people to get the care that they need in a way that they are able to receive it with the intent that it's delivered is, I think, the key. And most of the time it's just being gentle, right? And not prejudging, and when someone wants to stay against medical advice, it's asking, what do you need to do? Right? And just treating them like a person, not restricting their choices, but making the right choice just a little bit easier. Right? The choice that's good for them, or at least from my perspective.
It's the best you can do.
The best I can do, yeah.
You've spoken today and in our conversation, and often you break down your responses really, really organized. You have 4 things, and you make sure you cover them 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're so structured in your response, and I've actually observed you on the wards sometimes late night while I'm rounding, and you happen to be there, and you're teaching like a nurse or you're teaching a student something at like 2 a.m. And has teaching always been a big part of who you are? Have you always known, hey, I really love teaching?
I've never seen myself as a teacher, but I've always been involved in teaching. And I think my philosophy is that in order to really understand something, I need to be able to explain it to someone who knows nothing about it. If I can explain what I'm talking about to someone who knows absolutely nothing about what I'm talking about, then I've won. And that probably came from my dad. Right? So my dad was a logger.
A logger.
Yeah. He would log company.
So So when people cut down the trees, he makes sure that
he was
the
the one that
logs get to where they
he
go.
would cut down the trees.
Oh, he would cut them.
And I worked in the woods with him from the time I was 4 years old.
Wow.
So I grew up in a working class family, although he owned a business, right? But it was at 4 years old, I was going to work with him at 5:30 in the morning in the summer times, just so that I could spend time with my dad. And I had jobs like I would have a shovel and I would help fill in potholes on dirt roads and the logging roads and things like that, so that the logging trucks wouldn't bounce around and damage their suspension and whatnot. But I grew up in a household where my dad, although he was a physical laborer, he's probably one of the wisest people that I've met. And without the language around it, he's also extremely mindful, because he had lots of very repetitive tasks in his life that he had to do, and he'd always tell me, like, every tree is a little bit different, and he loves the outdoors. And that was the irony. He was a logger, but he was a committed environmentalist.
Oh.
And so there's he didn't go into logging by choice. Yeah, absolutely, right? So he was the most environmentally conscious logger I think I've ever met, and very aware of the damage that he would cause in service of something important, right?
Wow.
Can't have a house, can't have paper, can't have toilet paper in a pandemic if you don't have a logger.
Yeah.
Now we've got bamboo, we're looking at other sources, but back then we didn't, right? He's since retired, but he was not scientific. He was very, very bright, and went to school, but he didn't have the benefit of university education. But very curious, and I would always, he didn't have any necessarily innate knowledge of medicine or of the things that I was learning about when I was going to university. And so he always told me that I had this ability to be able to explain things that are really complex in very simple language, using anecdotes. And I think that's probably, I enjoy sharing knowledge. I don't see myself necessarily as a teacher, although I've taught most of my life. I have the privilege of being a full clinical professor with UBC. I was a Royal College examiner for quite a few years, so I've always taught or evaluated or been part of it. And I think that's part of the profession of medicine, is that teaching is part of our mandate, right? Grooming the next generation of physicians and sharing knowledge, because I think we call it the practice of medicine because that's exactly what it is. We never perfect it. We're always developing our repertoire of techniques and tools, and it evolves at such a rapid pace. It's a beautiful profession because it is necessarily abstract and individualized. At the same time, we have the benefits of all of these technologies that we can use to enhance our ability to deliver effective care. I think the thing that I love most is the ability to inspire others with a sense of curiosity, because as a physician, people don't question when we lay hands on them, right? There is no other profession that I'm aware of, physio maybe, but really healthcare, we are allowed, and I would even argue expected, to lay hands on patients. That is a privilege and a level of trust that exists with us in a way that no other profession has, I don't think. The privilege that I have as a physician to share, the reason I teach at night is because I love what I do. Do I like what I do every day? Not necessarily, but I love what I do every day, right? And Julius Erving, Dr. J, the basketball player, I think it was he that said, being a professional is doing what you love on days when you don't feel like doing it, or you don't like doing when you don't like doing what you're doing. And the point of that is, I love my job, even when it's difficult, and I know that how I show up for those other team members is also really important. And because I have the position that I have, I have rank as well, right? So when I'm on a ward at night, I want the team to feel inclusive. And if I'm being perfectly honest, it's not all altruistic, because if I teach this person something that I'm observing, And maybe I don't need to come back later on that night to look at it again, right? I might have another pair of eyes on them that might be able to check on the things that I know we need to check on. So it increases my bandwidth. I share these things, one, because I love it, right? And I feel it's such a privilege to be allowed to do the things that we do for patients in a way that we are immediately trusted. There's not very many other professions where the assumption is that you are, you are a thoughtful, compassionate person. You can destroy that impression really quickly with how you engage with the patient, but the assumption, if you're a healthcare worker, is that you're kind and that you're trustworthy. And so if we want to reinforce that benefit of that and reinforce that perception, then we need to act in a certain way. And that involves being a teacher in an appropriate sense. And I like teaching because I like making really complicated things as simple as possible. The danger I have is sometimes I make really simple things even more complicated than they need to be. Right? That's where I go sometimes, because I do believe that even the simple stuff is really complicated. There's a book that I gave to all my local department heads at Christmas time 2 years ago, called Thanks a Thousand. It's by A.J. Jacobs. I don't know if you read it.
It's on my to-read book.
Okay. So the book is about, and I think I've shared this with you, the book is about all of the things that are involved in the things that are mundane. And the reason that this is what spearheaded this book was he wanted to thank every person that was involved in creating his morning cup of coffee. And it ended up being 1,000 people. So it's Thanks 1,000. And so he wanted to thank the barista, and the coffee shop owner, and the person who made the cup, and the person who made sure that the water for New York was safe, and the coffee bean roaster, and the grower, and the distributor, and the person who flew the plane, and all of these things that come to create this mundane thing, this cup of coffee that's sitting on your tabletop in the morning. How complex that simple thing actually is. If you look at a doorknob, how it's perfectly shaped to accept your hand with a lock on the inside of it. There's a lot of thought that goes into the simplest of things. And I think that the approach of appreciating the simple and looking at the complexity of what's the simple allows you to appreciate and be grateful for the things that are routine and mundane. And when you can appreciate the kind of silver lining of the things that are mundane, then what that does is transform your way of engaging with the world. You become a little bit more receptive to kindness, a little bit more receptive to compassion, a little less closed. And when something hits you, you're not as reactive to it because you're like, oh man, I wonder if that person meant to do that. We know if someone steps on your foot, it hurts more if they meant to. Right? It's been shown in trials that if someone steps on your foot and they mean to do it, or if they step on your foot and it's accidental, it actually hurts more when you know the person meant to do it. I think that's fascinating, right? Physical pain being the same, the response to the pain is different. And so with the way we engage with the world, I think is profoundly influenced by the things that we're paying attention to. Right? We know that happens. So if we're paying attention to the wonder that exists in the mundane, and when something catches us a little off guard, maybe we're not as reactive to assume bad intent, and we're able to curate a sense of curiosity and a more adaptive response to that thing that is unpleasant, rather than just recoiling from it or pushing it away. Right? And I think that's the key. That's why I look at complexity, because I'm hoping that there's a kernel of goodness that I can pull out of it when it's really, really ugly. And I practice it because I find it interesting. I find it fulfilling and satisfying. It makes me feel better.
Who are some of the mentors that you might have had? And I know that there's probably more than 1,000.
I think that the people that have really transformed my thought. Most of them I haven't met. A lot of them I've read. Right? But people that have been instrumental in my life, obviously my parents.
What are their names?
Linda and Bill.
Linda and Bill.
Yeah, McDermid. My sister. My sister has been very, very important in my life as a
Joanna.
Yeah. She's an amazing. If I'm high performing, it pales in comparison to her. My grandmother, who I was very close to, and when you talk about mentors, I think my previous department head in Edmonton, really important. I would, everybody.
What was their name?
His name was Noel Gibney. He was very Gibney. Yeah, he was extremely influential in the way I approached medicine. Very supportive of me. You know, all of us in medicine, every single one of us is quirky. And we all have our little things that make us a little bit unique, right? And he embraced my quirkiness, right? And the things that I thought were important, he said, go ahead and do it. Right? He gave me the space to do the things that I thought were important. And when they panned out, franchised them. Right? Wow. So it was great. He gave me the autonomy and allowed me to find my own purpose and allowed me to master things that gave me the motivation to continue to do things that change things, and created an environment in which that was comfortable for me. High school, I had a geology teacher that was super instrumental in creating confidence for myself. I actually thought I wanted to be a geologist when I was in high school, because it was just so amazing to get outside and be able to tell a story of the earth looking at a set of rocks.
Yeah.
Right? So I went to Hawaii every year ago, and you see the lava flows, and you can imagine the story. And I think that's one of the things that really strikes me about medicine. We look at subtle things on the human body, and we tell a story about what's going on, right? And it's almost like magic, right? Where we can say, hey, I know you're a smoker. Why? Because I can see nicotine stains on your fingers that most people won't recognize if they're subtle, right? But even more so with diagnostics, when we're looking at a patient, we're looking for clues, and we're problem solving and trying to put together a puzzle and build a story. I think that other things, the people that I've read, I think that Atul Gawande, very, very interesting guy who I'd love to meet if I ever had the chance. Carol Tavris is an author who wrote a book called Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me. She's actually a friend of my family, a friend of a friend of my family.
I purchased that book after you mentioned it.
I
haven't read it yet.
You know, she's a fascinating lady, and I had an opportunity to talk to her on the phone, and I'd like to speak to her more. Benjamin Zander, super interesting guy.
You just mentioned him earlier.
Yeah, he's the conductor of the orchestra, and he's a motivational speaker. Oh. He and his wife have a consulting business, I think, where he talks about, and there's a TED talk that he does that is just magic, right? He talks about how people who love classical music, there's four kinds of people. There's people who love classical music. That's about 4% of people. There's people who will put classical music on and have a glass of wine. There's people who think they're tone deaf, and there's people who hate classical music. Right? and he said that people who think they're tone deaf aren't, because you can hear your mother calls and she's upset, you pick it up on the phone right away. You're not tone deaf, you actually have a very finely tuned ear, you just don't know what you're listening to. And then he goes into this beautiful discussion of what of Chopin. I'm not a musician, but he plays Chopin, and he talks about how a beginner plays it, and how an intermediate player plays it, and then how someone who's a very skilled player plays it. And it's about how they chunk the information that's coming across. And he says things that are beautiful, like, and the E flat at the end, whatever tone, the note at the end of this phrase makes the note before it sad. Right?
The note before it's sad.
Sad. Like, yeah, so the way, and when you listen to it, it's like, oh yeah, like the music, maybe there's an emotional quality to it that you hear because of this particular note, and he chose this note because it makes the note before a little bit sad. Right? And so he tells a story beautifully through the music, and by the end of it, everybody loves classical music, right? And that's not the intent is to use music as a way of communicating with others it's bridging, using one silo and bridging an idea to another domain. That's what I love when I see someone who's able to take two disparate things, find a connection between the two of them, and then create something new and beautiful as a result of that. And those are the kinds of people that I'm interested in reading. I think that I just love learning about things.
And we're so blessed that you're such a voracious reader. You bring all those metaphor and analogy into your into the curated experiences that you give to us in our medical leadership.
Thank you.
So it's a blessing. At least somebody's reading. Have you always been a voracious reader?
Yeah, pretty much. I much more so now. During residency, I read medical stuff a lot. I still read a lot of nonfiction. I don't read a lot of fiction unless my wife says this is a really good book, and then I'll read it. But I read very, very fast, and I don't always finish my books. So I often will take a book and get the kind of gist of it, and then use the idea, the kind of central idea, and then look for something else and link the idea. And then I often come back to it. A guilty pleasure of my mind is that if I really like a book, I buy 3 copies of it: paper copy, audiobook, digital copy. And so I have all of my kind of mission critical books that I'm reading on my phone.
Mission critical?
Right? Yeah, it's not like on my phone.
I've never heard someone say
yeah.
mission critical.
Well, it's when I have a quote that is really captures what I think is important, or an idea that I want to reflect back on, because I'm always kind of trying to bring ideas into the moment that are relevant. I want to take contemporaneous stuff, and I find that's the best way to be authentic. When I'm excited about something, it's really easy to pretend to be excited because I'm actually excited, right? It's like, oh, I just read this thing, it's super interesting, here's what I have to share. And sometimes it comes off half-baked because I haven't actually fully thought it through, but most of the time I've thought about it enough that I can share the idea, and then it becomes a conversation rather than a monologue. I think that, so my wife, we have quite a small house. It's not an expansive mansion, but there are lots of books in it. And she curses me every time I bring in a paper copy. It's like, this is an important one, and this is an important one. And sometimes they never get opened. But what I may only read a half a dozen pages of it, but I actually find that I have a different experience reading a paper book than reading a digital book or reading an audiobook. I prefer to read a paper book, but if I'm reading it for content, I can highlight a digital book, and it's synchronized on all my devices. So when I want to come back to an idea, I can search for it, and I can find it again. Which allows me to have the stuff that I've read at my fingertips. When I want to speak about something, or if I have a topic that I need to prepare for, I often will remember kind of snippets of something, but I'll go and refresh my memory on the things that I know, so that they're again kind of brought back to the surface, and I can speak to them a little bit more eloquently because I thought they were important. The audiobook is a different way of experiencing in my commute from Vancouver. I live in Vancouver, my commute's 45 minutes, so I can listen to the book and I can go back and read it again and reinforce it in multiple ways if I think it's really useful. But there's lots of books I start and I'm like, don't like it, or I think I've gotten out of this what I need to get out of it, or what I want to get out of it right now. Then come back to it in a little while and build a repertoire of knowledge that I think links. And I just go where my fancy takes me. Most of the time it's
Was it called Rise of Superman? Or
The Rise of Superman.
That was a fantastic recommendation, and that was the one that spoke a lot about the flow states.
Yeah, flow states.
And I think we spoke about it a little bit today. We touched on how ideally our system may develop a kind of
a flow state
where we are using hopefully some visualized data and responding to it in an organic and adaptive way.
Absolutely.
Meeting exactly the needs of our patients. And
what I think is fascinating about flow is we talk about access and flow. That's one of the buzz phrases that we've got. And what I reflected on was, what is a flow state? What does it actually mean? It's the continuous addition of value to a patient's journey. But really,
continuous addition of
value to a patient's journey. So flow can be happening with a patient not moving. Theoretically, right? We mistake movement for flow a lot, right? And so we have to be careful that we are not misinterpreting what's actually happening. Disneyland, the magicians, the masters of disguising waiting as flow, right? Because you're waiting all the time, but they create distractions and interaction that makes you believe that your journey is having value added to it, right? Because you're actually experiencing something that isn't just a lineup, right? Healthcare, we're really bad at distinguishing movement from flow.
Yeah.
So, but the idea behind flow is a flow state is achieved when there's a perfect match between challenge and skill. You have clear goals or objectives, and you have immediate feedback.
Say those again.
So it's the appropriate challenge, mix between challenge and skill level, and the challenge needs to be just a little bit more because you're a stretch goal. You're growing. Exactly. So it's something that challenges you. That isn't something that you can do on automatic pilot. Otherwise, you won't hit flow. But if you're just stretched a little bit, so that you can reach it, but you gotta reach for it. matched with immediate feedback so you know if you're off target, and you have a clear objective for what you're trying to achieve, then the beauty of that is that the next action becomes almost self-evident. You don't need to think about what you need to do because it's obvious what you need to do. You need to, if you're trying to grab, I'm trying to grab this hand and I'm going here, I know exactly what I need to do to get a little better hand. And the thing that's fascinating is if I'm doing handwriting, close your eyes when you're writing something. See how much harder it is when you're not getting immediate feedback on your handwriting. But also try to slow it down to the point where you're conscious of what you're doing. It's really hard to slow down and make each letter for when you're spelling your name, something that you spell all the time. Try to slow your signature down and still have it be effective. Really tough, right? The reason these flow states are important is I think there's multiple levels for this. Flow is associated with the sense of subjective well-being. When you're reaching for something and you're achieving it, it's effortless effort. That's the idea. That's the catchphrase that goes with flow. It's effortless effort. Skiing, snowboarding, surfing, all these things that test your limits and are often associated with falling. Right? Gravity puts you into or rotation puts you into a state of flow reliably. But when you're at work, these things that intrinsically hit intrinsic states of flow are associated with a profound sense of well-being. Right? And when you hear about these spiritual experiences, those are the high-level flow states. Right? The idea is that we set the conditions for flow states to emerge. And organizational flow is actually about having clear objectives, immediate feedback, good match between challenge and skill. And then when it comes to dealing with patients, we know what the next thing that's required to do is because we're paying attention, we're getting that feedback that we need so that we can do stuff with less effort. It's not about doing more with less, and we talk about needing to work smarter. Well, in order to work smarter, we need to be able to, we don't want to work harder, we want to work smarter. Working smarter means making finer adjustments to what we're doing to nudge things back on track, which means we need the feedback to be able to know how to nudge. Otherwise, you got to hammer it back into place when it's out of alignment. I think the beauty, though, is that flow states aren't just individual experiences. There are things that I think about with consciousness that when you get into a conversation, when you lose track of time, that's a kind of flow state where you just are so engaged and engrossed in the conversation that you completely lose track of time. You lose track of physical sensations that are going on, and it's about kind of resonance with another person. Your ability to be aware of the environment changes through that other person. And I personally believe that when we talk about things like patient-centered care, or a better term for it, I think is relation-centered care, I think it's a collective flow state. I think our interactions change. We start to resonate with one another. A therapist or a healthcare worker and a patient start to resonate, and that's where we get therapeutic collaboration. That's where we get compliance with a therapeutic plan. When the person understands and believes that this healthcare worker is on side with them, and they have a relationship where they feel a connection that comes from that kind of neural resonance that we have, because we're receptive to the energy that another person is giving us. When you get that sense of flow, you can extend your ability to respond to stimuli in different ways. You can tap into a different way of thinking, or a different way of being, or have the availability of different ways of perceiving the world. That allows you to create a slightly more nuanced response if you do it smartly. Right? And so I see the therapeutic relationship between a healthcare worker and a patient as one that requires an element of neural resonance and synchronicity that comes from the emotional connection that you have, making eye contact, having the time, not being task-oriented, all of these things that allow you to take difficult situations, make sense of them, and then have the person emerge from that with a different way of behaving that transforms their lives and allows them to escape the repetitive cycles that generate a illness. That's the philosophical approach and the kind of conceptual framework that I work in. Same thing applies to leadership. How do I get the person that I'm struggling with, engaging with, how do I get them to resonate with me in a way that makes sense? Sometimes I'll go to my default mode, which is share more, share more, share more. And if someone's not receptive, I need to be able to say, we're done here, right? I don't always do that because I want to share. That's my kind of default mode. But being aware that someone is tuning out, important for me to recognize. Important for me to recognize because then it's not being effective.
You spoke a lot about leadership today, and that was really one of my intentions, to get some of the mechanics and some of the building blocks that allow you to lead in a stressful, really stressful environment where lives are truly at stake, where a lot of physician egos are involved as well. You mentioned the Sauder School of Business,
Yes.
and I know another Sauder School of Business graduate who's been in the media lately, Dr. Bonnie Henry,
Yeah.
and she's being lauded by so many of our colleagues right now for her. I think a lot of it's for her countenance and her ability to transmit compassion and excellence at the same time, and effectiveness. Did you go to Sauder School of Business with her?
No, I didn't, but I think she was in cohort 2.
Oh.
I was in cohort 3. So we both did, we weren't there together, but we were very close, we were contemporaneous graduates of the physician leadership program. I think Bonnie's done a phenomenal job. I think that her skill with managing the Sauder School of Business, I have no idea how impactful it was for her. For me, it gave me some of the language that I needed. That was probably the most important thing, and the connections with people. I found it fascinating to sit in a room with like-minded individuals who really wanted to change a system. I hadn't experienced that before. I came to medicine, to leadership, not with a sense of cynicism, but a sense of kind of loneliness, because I didn't know if I was completely by myself. I think going to Sauder probably gave me the courage to be an authentic leader, if that means anything, and to embrace my own incompleteness, because I hadn't heard those terms before. So the language of allowing myself not to have all of the answers, really important. Learning to be humble enough to accept that there are things that we do not know, that maybe not, I won't say not knowable, but presently not known, and not known by anybody yet. The ability to know that my way is just my way, and it comes from hopefully an educated, thoughtful position, but that what I'm more attached to is the journey than the outcome, knowing that the outcome is also important. The journey is the outcome a lot of times, rather than the outcome that we think we're driving at. Bonnie has, I think, led in a way that is extremely compassionate. She has been extremely resistant to telling people what to do, to encouraging people to behave with a sense of community, and be calm, be safe, be kind, I think is brilliant. She is extremely non-reactive. I mean, all of the things that I would embrace. And I actually got to work with her during the Ebola outbreak in Liberia, West Africa in 2015. So I worked side by side with her.
In 2015, you were in Liberia?
No. In BC, coordinating our own provincial Ebola response should a patient show up here. So she and I worked very closely together, and it was a great privilege to work alongside her to try to develop that. And I think our COVID response actually leveraged some of the work that we did, right? Because we thought about this, and one of the things that she was very instrumental in doing was ensuring that the learnings that we had from that, knowing that it was very unlikely that we were going to have an Ebola outbreak in BC, but we didn't want to squander the work that it had done, right? It was declared an epidemic, and we did a ton of work to prepare because we were told we had to, right? And it was a smart thing to do. But then when it was done, what she was very good at doing was not losing that knowledge, right? And making sure that we had captured some of the learnings in a way that allowed us to leverage for the inevitable pandemic that would happen with global travel. So I think we were very lucky. I think there was a lot of skill that she did navigate, and she made a lot of very good choices. the next few months are going to be really interesting. I don't know how. I think people are tired of being cooped up, and how we curate that sense of collective responsibility for one another is going to be challenging, especially since people's level of fear is a little lower than it was before. It's now not unknown. It's now a lot more quantified. So people can say 3% mortality, 1% mortality. I'm willing to take that chance. I'm young, right? I mean, so people are starting to make those kinds of choices. So this collective sense of responsibility we have for each other is starting to wane a little bit. And I don't know how it's going to play out. But what I do know is that authoritative choices have significant consequences. So if you're going to call people out and threaten authoritative action, you better be able to follow up on it, because the moment people call your bluff and you can't follow through, you're done. It's free for all, right? So I think appealing to people's better nature and creating that moral imperative to do what's right, rather than having fiscal penalties or legal requirements to do stuff, is a way that is more effective, depending on the nature of the problem dealing with. Sometimes you've got to have an authoritative approach, but just for the sake of argument, people say there's a $1,000 fine for not wearing a mask, or $1,000 fine for traveling out of the country. Some people say, okay, I got a real cost of doing business, add $1,000 to my vacation. I will just pay it when I get back. You change that moral imperative for keeping your neighbors safe for a cost of doing business. And if you make it $10,000, you just reduce the number of people that'll say, no, that's ridiculous, right? You're going to bury someone in debt for not wearing a mask or for leaving the country, whereas you know that there's the ultra wealthy who just say, fine, whatever, still cost of doing business. Make it $1 million. Well, that's not reasonable. Or is it? Right? I mean, how do you quantify the right fiscal target for doing what's right? You can't. They're different things, right? So unless you're going to say something like, I'm going to take away 10% of your gross income, right? I mean, and have it scalable so that it's the same impact on every individual person. It's fraught with problems and challenges. So I don't know how we're going to navigate the next steps, but I do believe that her approach has clearly demonstrated a positive impact. That we had some of the best mortality rates in the world. We had teams that were really high functioning. The teams that were looking after the patients with COVID gelled and incredibly well, Surrey being one of those teams. And her quiet, calm, compassionate way, I think, set the tone as the that's the role of the medical leader, is to set the tone and the conditions for the right behaviors to emerge. I think she did that really beautifully.
Absolutely. I'm going to do what you said about checking in regularly to see if I need to adapt by checking the camera. Oh my gosh, we are still good. I am impressed. Okay, so we have to close. But I have 2 more questions before we close. So one of the great things that Dr. Bonnie Henry did was that she made herself more present and available, at least through the media, than any other health leader that I've seen in history. And I think that was, it spoke to her and her team recognizing the importance of a leader being present.
Right.
And also, every day, she's like telling us the numbers. She's giving us that immediate feedback to know the consequences of our group behavior. It's actually kind of mirroring some of the stuff that you were talking about of what needs to happen at Surrey, where we need to kind of know how we're performing and then adapting on our own.
Absolutely.
How far away are we from that state as a microcosm of our province in Surrey Memorial Hospital, of having the right information in front of us, data visualized per se, to what we need to do in your ideal vision?
So I don't know the answer to that, but I can say is that we're close.
Yeah.
But it all depends on how we set our priorities and what sabotages our ability to execute on our long-term priorities. So it's labor intensive, but it's the way we develop the data visualization and the tools, there's only a couple of people in Fraser that know how to do it, right? And what I've seen when I've asked these people for some, we'll call them minimum viable products, that's the technical term for it. So the first pass.
Skeletons of
just
things will
show me something that works, that is bare bones. They've been able to turn those projects, when they have no other competing priorities, around in 48 hours.
Wow.
Right? So the ability of those, for us to create the tools that are required, my belief is that the team can create the tools faster than we can use them. So the question is, how do we ensure that we're building stuff that is the right stuff for the teams to use? Because I can sketch out a skeleton of all of the things that we need, but at the end of the day, if we're measuring the impact by the ability to influence process, then we need to pick the things that are required based on what the frontline providers need, not what I think they need. So that requires me to first show them possibility and get engagement based on meeting an unmet need, and then allowing them to have input into developing the next phase of that. So there are technological limitations. They may ask for things that simply we cannot procure. There are system level silos where I can't bridge this system with this system. There are competing priorities. I don't have the only vision for data science in Fraser Health. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I would love to have free reign to say, build all this stuff and let's see what happens. But there are other very smart people who, when I look at the work they're doing, also super valuable. So how quickly could we do it? We could do it really fast. I think the real question is, how quickly can we do it effectively? And the answer is, I don't know, because it's dependent on so many variables. Rather than trying to predict it, what I would really like to see is us start to do it. And that means putting the first product out in front of people and starting to use it. And we did that back in May of 2019, right, with Archie, that data visualization.
About 14 months ago.
14 months. But we executed on that vision to implementation, I think it was 6 weeks. And we had an MVP in 2. So we could do this. What we don't have is a health system structure that allows for that iterative change to happen at scale, because we're not used to it, right? There have been regulatory requirements and patient privacy-related issues that we've had to navigate, and all of that's been tossed up in the air, and we have to figure out where it's going to settle out after COVID, right? Because all of the things that were previously impossible, lots of the things that were previously impossible are not possible. I don't know what the time frame for being able to execute on this in an effective way will be, but I do believe it's going to happen quickly, because I think we have to execute on it quickly if we're going to salvage public health care in the post-COVID era, right? Things cost a lot of money during COVID, and if we really want to revolutionize healthcare, now's the time to do it, and there's time imperative. So from my standpoint, I need to be really clear on what needs to be executed on, and I need to be able to speak in a very simple fashion so that I'm not confusing our senior leadership team with a lot of noise. I need to be really, really high signal to noise ratio and be really clear on individual steps that achieve an outcome in the short term that is aligned with a long-term need. So there's a lot of work that I have to do to really be able to answer that question. We're in the process of doing it. And I think right now there's been some regional interest in creating a steering committee around this specific topic. How do we leverage data science to do the job that we need to do? I think that we are poised to do it. The question is, how much buy-in do we have? How effective can we do it? And it's really going to be that iterative change. Like if we're really effective right out of the gate and we have lots of buy-in, I think Surrey can be a beta site for this, right? I think we have the right teams and the right mentality and the right collective culture to be able to execute on it. And the key is going to be for people to be able to accept that it's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. And that requires a collective mindset shift, because the response to something as imperfect as I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Our responsibility as healthcare leaders is to be able to iterate on the feedback, receive feedback, and iterate on the tools so that the teams can accelerate, right? And that's the key: is how quickly can we accelerate? It's not about linear scaling; it's about how fast can we accelerate this journey that relies on us having the right feedback. I would just say it was. I told my wife that you wanted to interview me, and I thought, wow, this is it's really flattering that you feel that I've had an impact, and that my leadership style is valuable. I'm just, to be perfectly honest, I'm just me. Right? When you talk about the leadership, I also firmly believe that leadership is a behavior, not a position. Right? So there's lots of informal leaders. I consider you a leader. You demonstrate incredible leadership skills, and you lead with influence as much as you lead with authority. And so Mariette often tells me, it's not about having authority; it's having the audacity to do what's necessary in the moment, assuming that you're aligned with what's right and what's needed. My leadership is just me being me. And I kind of practice the golden rule, and I hope to. I don't know if I told you this before, but when I did my interview for the site medical director position in 2015, I said, I will know when I've been successful when someone tells me that they're proud to be a physician at Surrey Memorial Hospital, which has an outpatient care and surgery center. And I think I said at our second to last medical leadership meeting, someone said, I'm really proud to work here. And I thought, I'm gonna drop the mic, right? Right? But I'd achieved the kind of succinct and the soundbite that I needed to hear, that meant that I had accomplished something that was important to me, a metric that was important to me. And it's not about quantitative metrics necessarily, it's about sometimes the qualitative metrics. Have I shifted things in the way that I feel is important? I wanted to create a place where I was proud to work, and I can say without any hesitation that I'm proud to be a physician and healthcare worker at Surrey Memorial Hospital. Like, that's just the way I feel about it. It is a place that I am proud to say I work at. And if you heard the royal family interview with the healthcare workers, so I heard the team speaking of family, my work family and my home family. The language that I heard that group using was really beautiful, because it reinforced the things that I have tried to emphasize as what I think are important. My voice being one of 600 docs and 2,500 employees, but having the privilege of getting to stand on a slightly higher soapbox and preach my beliefs. I heard a lot of language that really resonated with me, that we spend so much time in our jobs in medicine that it's not just a job, it's a vocation, it's a calling. And if it's reduced to the deliverables in a contract, it's, you've lost if that's what you're looking at. So what I see as having emerged from that interview is really beautiful language that reflects the things that I felt were really important, that I'm hearing coming back to me as a result of whatever journey I've helped curate. Certainly not as a result of my tenure, but during my time as site medical director, I've seen a shift, and I'm so grateful for having been witness to it, and having been shared, and being able to participate and speak my truth, because it's been important for me. I feel very supported in this hospital, and I certainly I do this job because I love this place, and I love working for the people who ostensibly work under me. I believe in servant leadership. I work for the people at Surrey Memorial Hospital. I also work for the executive team at Central City, but the people that I am responsible for are the healthcare workers and patients that are here on site. And during COVID, I felt a personal responsibility for the safety of every single person, which is why I worked so hard. It was it was out of a sense of duty and a sense of obligation and a sense of just, I wanted people to be safe. And I think our teams managed that. And so proud to just be part of this team.
It takes so much to bring idealism into leadership positions in complex systems that are inundated with cynicism and stuff. So it's a gargantuan feat that you have pulled off, at least in the 5 years that I've been witness to it. I remember you showing me a video when I first entered into my medical leadership position of some silly guy dancing on a hill. And you told me the story of the first follower. It wasn't necessarily that important about the first guy who does the silly dancing, but then the next person who comes in there and joins in the silly dancing takes that risk. And you invited us to be part of some of that first followers. That was a great analogy, metaphor, lesson.
Well, I mean, a leader who's dancing, doing crazy dance on the hill is just a lonely nut doing his thing, right? But the first follower is the most important person, more important than the leader, because that first follower lends credibility to the leader. You're no longer a lone nut, you're now two. And when that second person joins, then you have the ability to create a movement. And the TED Talk or the clip is how a movement starts. And it's a brilliant little video clip that I love because it's silly and foolish, and it's how I think change happens. You have got to embrace that first follower, not in a position of subordination, but as an equal. And that's the message that came out of that video, is that the first follower is embraced by the leader as an equal. And once you do that, then it's a shared vision. And when it's a shared vision, the leader and the first follower respond to each other and create that synergy and that infectivity that encourages the second follower and the third follower. And then all of a sudden people are like, we gotta follow this. And then at the end, a few stragglers like, oh, I really didn't want to follow this, but now I feel bad not following it, because that's just what people do, right? So the willingness to embrace others as potential first followers and not have all the answers. Because the solution that we come up with when the first follower joins is different than the solution I would have come up with by myself, right? My dance changes when the first follower joins, because then, unless there are two people dancing alone, right, in which case you haven't really made that connection. It's the connection and the responsiveness of one to the other that actually creates the flow state that allows other people to feel that energy, and then a third person, and a fourth person, and then the energy that comes out of that group and a collective sense of well-being, it becomes infectious. And that's what I've actually witnessed at some of these mindfulness sessions. There are ways of creating flow and collective experience. It's almost tribal, right? Through music and movement and mirroring and all of these things that I think when we start to explore flow states from a scientific standpoint, we're going to see that there's conditions that you can set that encourage flow states to emerge. A big part of it is pausing and feedback. There are situations where you can't pause, and so what you need is even faster feedback to allow you to shift when the changes are more subtle, and it also involves more skill. So when the stakes are high and the pace is fast, you need to have highly skilled, highly tuned, ultra-focused people on the key things that you need to execute on, which means narrowing focus. You can't have your code team thinking about budget. You gotta do CPR and resuscitate the patient, right? You could have your pharmacy thinking about budget. How do we optimize our safety checks so that we get 99.9999% accuracy at the bedside in terms of cycles of redundancy? That's perfectly on site, and it's what we do. But you don't have your code team thinking, should I use this intratracheal tube? Should I shock again? It is, however many cents a joule for shocking, right, from BC Hydro. I don't know if we should use 360, let's use 350, right? I mean, it's just not what you do. So when the stakes are high and the pace is fast, you have to be able to narrow focus and have less extraneous information so you don't get the cognitive overload that is required to be able to perform. Like you avoid cognitive overload that prevents you from performing effectively. I think that the leadership, though, is about creating a collective sense of flow. And when you create collective flow, there's a narrative that emerges that allows you to not have to speak your truth as a leader over and over and over again. It gets reinforced by other people around you. And that involves making sure that you've been trustworthy and that you've had conflict so that the story is actually accepted and committed to by other people. And I think that's where we're starting to get results in Surrey specifically, is that we have our leadership team as a really cohesive group. Even though there's differences of opinion, we're all moving towards the same goals. Even if we may not be all moving at the pace with which we want each other to move, but collectively we're shifting in a direction that is similar. It's not uniform, but it's similar. And there is some advantage in non-uniformity, right? Because uniformity,
diversity.
Yeah, uniformity makes it harder to pivot when you need to. If someone's already going in that direction a little bit, and they come back to the group and they go and they come back, you embrace that diversity because that allows you to have inherent knowledge of how to pivot when you need to. So I don't believe in standardization of everything. You standardize what you need to standardize and nothing more. And you allow for creativity around what things aren't mission critical to standardize. Standardization should not have a target of 100%, maybe 60 or 70, because then you start cramming people into boxes they don't fit in when you try to standardize everything. And you know this from your quality improvement stuff, right? Being able to embrace only what is necessary and nothing more, doing the good enough standardization job, rather than creating an exhaustive list of all the possibilities. Hit 60%, 70%, way better than trying to hit 100%. Let the teams do what they want to do with that extra 40% because they will make good choices if they're empowered to do it. Forcing 100% standardization costs more because we'll systematize our errors too.
Yeah.
Right?
Build in your errors, fix them.
Yeah.
We probably have to get out of here.
Yes.
Terribly. Sorry.
No problem.
For a third time here.
Okay.
I'm Sam, one of the coordinators.
Hi, Sam.
We shut down at 8:30 already.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I thought it was 11 o'clock that the UCRC closed.
We used to be until
Yeah.
the government took our funds away.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
And reduced our hours. But
2 minutes?
no, that's fine. Yeah. So we've at 9 o'clock typically the alarm goes on, and so
Okay.
then there's like motion detectors and things like that. So I'll wait till you guys are in for.
Yeah, we're just doing our closing right now. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
we're sorry.
I was
We're-
like, you guys
we're
were in
visitors.
conversation
Yeah.
before I stood here. I'm like,
We're
I just
visitors.
spoke with Marietta. She let me know who you guys were. Totally
I'm so
okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Totally okay.
Apologies.
Totally cool.
Okay.
All right.
Visitors.
Thank you.
We keep that in.
Bye.
We keep that
Sorry.
in.
The alarm's going to go off, so yeah.
That'll be good for the video.
Yeah, exactly.
Get more on pace.
Exactly. Yeah. And here's the motion sensor, and now the police are arresting Dr. McDermid for trespassing.
That's a mess. Oh, no. Okay.
I'm Dr. McDermid. Yeah, sure.
We covered a lot of things today. If somebody listening to this wants to know about that criteria that you use, the 4 criteria that you use to ask yourself when somebody that you need to that you need to check out, you're curious about
Yes.
whether or not a behavioral intervention needs to happen. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
way to put it.
Yeah.
How do people read up about that?
So very simple ways to Google just culture, but
Just culture.
Just culture. But and you'll see if you look on images, actually you'll see there's a whole bunch of different algorithms,
Okay.
and it's actually very algorithmic, the decisions that you need to make. But even easier for Fraser Health employees is that it's been incorporated into our disciplinary structure. So recognizing that system errors are a problem in our quality structure is looking at this now. So when we do a system level review, before you embrace that system level review, if we're looking at, for example, a medical management review or a practice review, we would look at the event if it's a sentinel event. Was there willful intent to harm? Is there substance use problems? Is there and those four questions? It's actually embedded within our quality structure now at Fraser Health. It's probably referenced in our medical staff rules as well, because I saw some references to it in the new draft that's coming out.
Okay.
But the algorithm itself is, I believe, available on the Fraser Health website. But certainly Just Culture is an easy way to see some of the background that is system agnostic and not contextually dependent on Fraser Health, because there is language in the Fraser Health stuff that is different than the others, like how long you have to action a certain item or certain kind of behavior and those kind of regulatory or policy level decisions that happen in Fraser Health specifically.
Like you said, you often avoid the public eye or avoid, you're a relatively private person, so we really appreciate you going on camera for this. It means so much, Rob, and again, your leadership has been really inspiring for all of us. And I remember at the last meeting when you mentioned you might be potentially going on to a different position or you're still deciding. I know it's not final.
Yeah.
I heard and I felt all the groans and people actually defying, like, I hope you don't actually. Every voice from every department represented there was similar in that it would suck if you were to step away. But
Well, thank you. I believe that's a profound compliment, which is both unexpected and very humbling. Because, like I said before, I have the privilege of just being myself when I'm up there, and I get to speak my truth to a whole bunch of people who are really smart, and in a lot of ways way smarter than I am. I have a very narrow set of expertise that fortunately touches a lot of different spaces. I feel profoundly privileged to do what I do, and I think that hearing that what I have curated is appreciated is all the thanks that I could ever ask for. So thank you for sharing that with me. It's not always clear when you're in a leadership position whether you're doing a good job. It can be a lonely position to hold because being fair and not playing favorites and being fully transparent means that sometimes friendships are challenging, because if you're very close with one person, it's perceived as nepotism or whatever equivalent. But I fundamentally believe I am pretty private, but the way you know what drives a person and the why is where they're willing to go against their better nature in service of something beyond themselves. I don't like being in the public eye. I get to do it all the time in my position, and I do it with passion because it's in service of something that I truly believe in. I like growing up with a book at home with my family, but I stand in front of an audience sometimes of 400, 500, 600, 700 people and talk, even though I get sweaty palms and I feel a bead of sweat drip down between my shoulder blades when I'm standing up in front of it. Even the Medical Staff Association meeting, right? The act of standing up and being on stage is stressful for me because I am not.
you know too much.
I'm not Austin. I don't like to be in the spotlight. I like to share the spotlight with people who I believe are as deserving as I am. But I do it because I believe in the people that I lead. I believe in their skills and their ability and their passion. I want to empower them, and being allowed to represent the physicians and medical staff and midwives and the nurse practitioners in Surrey as the state medical director is an awesome, and I use that in the most intentional sense of the word, it's an awesome responsibility and an honor to be able to hold that role. So thank you for the compliment.
And just like the banner says up there on the critical care tower, level 3, your team does pull off miracles on the regular, I think. They're part of that.
You are part of the team, so our team.
And so we got you for at least for another 2 decades in your position,
That's right, yes, you convinced me.